The elderly woman took a glance at the golden light barrier, and a hint of elation and approval flashed through her eyes. The elderly man didn't say anything, but his gaze was firmly focused on the living corpse inside the golden light barrier, and it was unclear what he was thinking. All of a sudden, Luo Chinghai flew through the air before also descending in front of the golden light barrier. "What are you trying to do, Grand Palace Master Luo?" the elderly man asked in a cold voice. "What am I trying to do? Most of the high zenith pills are in that thing's body right now. Are you trying to claim all of those pills for yourselves?" Luo Chinghai sneered as he began to chant an incantation, and a burst of radiant blue light appeared over his body. The elderly man's expression darkened slightly, and he was just about to do something when the elderly woman raised a hand to stop him. "It's fine, let him do as he pleases." The elderly man's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, but he still did as he was told in the end. A layer of fiery blue light appeared over Luo Chinghai's body, and he began to give off an enormous high zenith stage as he swept a sleeve through the air. The blue staff projection appeared once again, and it was giving off a terrifying aura as it struck the golden light barrier. The entire palace shuddered violently, as did the golden light barrier, but once again it was able to remain firm. Luo Chinghai's expression darkened slightly upon seeing this, and everyone else was also quite stunned by how resilient the light barrier was proving to be. All of a sudden, the entire palace had fallen silent, and the only sound came from the scorching white flame beneath the pill cauldron. "What's the deal with that soul fragment and that soul-nurturing burner, fellow Taoist Li?" Taoist Hu Yan asked as he made his way over to Han Li. Everyone else was also quite interested to hear the answer to this question, and all of a sudden, everyone's attention was focused on Han Li again. Han Li was silent for a moment, then explained, "I discovered the burner in a set of ruins, and I thought it was rather special, so I decided to take it with me. I didn't know there was a soul fragment residing in it." This was clearly not the truth, but Taoist Hu Yan merely nodded in response and didn't ask any further questions. As for everyone else, they were clearly also unconvinced, but just like Taoist Hu Yan, no one raised any further questions. Luo Chinghai returned his gaze to the golden light barrier, then suddenly gave a cold harumph before walking away. The other vast flow palace cultivators hurriedly approached him, and they began to converse with one another through voice transmission. Meanwhile, Han Li was staring at the living corpse inside the golden light barrier, with a contemplative look on his face. How exactly were that soul fragment and the living corpse related? Had the soul fragment asked him to take it out of that secret area so that it could come here? Also, Worm 3 had requested him to refine this origin void pill well in advance, so was she already aware that this living corpse was inside the High Zenith Palace? If so, what was her objective? All of these questions were flashing through his mind, but he didn't have answers for any of them. In the end, he merely shook his head and refrained from pondering these matters any further. It wasn't like they had anything to do with him anyway. As long as Worm 3 and the others didn't do anything to directly harm his interests, he had no intention of getting involved in their affairs. Most importantly, all of the high zenith pills had already emerged from the cauldron at this point, and he had managed to secure 2 of them, thereby completing his objective, so he didn't want to stay here any longer. With that in mind, he was just about to turn around when he suddenly cast his gaze toward the living corpse under the light barrier, as a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. Just now, one of the living corpse's fingers seemed to have twitched slightly. However, it was only for an instant, and he couldn't be sure that it wasn't just a figment of his imagination. "What's wrong, fellow Taoist Li?" Taoist Hu Yan asked through voice transmission. Han Li took a glance at everyone else to discover that no one else seemed to have noticed what he had just seen, and he shook his head as he replied, Nothing. Taoist Hu Yen didn't pursue the subject any further, instead changing the topic as he suggested. It doesn't appear as if there are any other treasures in this palace, so how about we go somewhere else? Han Li immediately cast his gaze toward the roof of the palace, and all of the surrounding restrictions upon hearing this. The combination of the palace's roof and these restrictions was able to ward off pill tribulations, and as a Tao pill master, he was naturally very intrigued. However, having just unleashed his spirit domain, he had already determined that the roof of the palace was one with the rest of the palace. Even after such a fierce battle had taken place, the walls of the palace were still completely unscathed, indicating that the entire structure was near indestructible, so it was clearly impossible to remove the roof and take it with him. With that in mind, Han Li heaved a forlorn internal sigh as he nodded in response. Aside from the high zenith pills, he had reaped some other rewards as well. Having witnessed the Golden Palace withstand 4 pill tribulations, he had gleaned much of the profound elements of the restrictions set up within the palace, and there were some similarities between these restrictions and his integrated 5 extremes mountain. "Have you recorded everything?" Han Li asked internally. Somewhere inside his body, Taoist Zai was holding a white jade slip, which contained an extremely complete and detailed image of all of the restrictions in the entire palace, and it gave an affirmative response. A hint of elation flashed through Han Li's eyes upon receiving this confirmation. The restrictions in this place were quite profound, and he was planning to study them carefully once he left the Infernal Frost Immortal Manor. If he could incorporate this set of restrictions into his integrated 5 extremes mountain, the result may not be inferior to this golden roof, and that would surely be immensely helpful to his future pill refinement. Right at this moment, a loud crack suddenly rang out from the green pill cauldron, and Han Li turned to discover that Jin Tong had flown onto the cauldron in her beetle form. He had completely failed to notice this, and at this moment she was taking large bites out of the cauldron. The white flame beneath the cauldron had already receded, and a layer of green light appeared over its surface in an attempt to keep Jin Tong at bay, but to no avail. Perhaps it was because the white flames had just incinerated the restrictions around the cauldron, but on this occasion, the gray statues on either side of the palace remained completely still. "What are you doing, Jin Tong?" Han Li flew over to the cauldron in a flash, and a pained look flashed through his eyes at the sight of the chunk that had already been bitten out of it. Jin Tong was chewing on that chunk of the cauldron as she replied in a muffled voice, "I'm starving after so much exercise. I've had to hold myself back this entire time because you told me to wait until all of the pills were ready." "Fine, but there's no time for you to eat the cauldron now," Han Li replied with a resigned sigh, then swept a sleeve through the air to release a burst of azure light that enveloped the entire cauldron. Regardless of how exceptional the cauldron was, there was no changing the fact that a chunk had already been bitten out of it, and there was no point in scolding Jin Tong. Furthermore, he didn't possess the ability to repair a treasure of such a high caliber, so it would just have to serve as a snack for Jin Tong later. Everyone else took a glance in Han Li's direction, then quickly averted their eyes. All of the high zenith pills had already emerged, while the cauldron itself had already been damaged, thereby significantly lowering its value, so it wasn't worth fighting for, particularly if it meant having to oppose a golden immortal who had mastered the laws of time. With another sweep of Han Li's sleeve, the burst of azure light raised the cauldron upward, and the entire palace shuddered violently as the cauldron's deep-rooted legs were forcibly wrenched out of the ground. The residual green light flashing over its surface instantly faded, and Han Li stowed both Jin Tong and the cauldron away into a spirit beast pouch. In the same instant that the cauldron flew into the spirit beast pouch, a white shadow shot out from within, then vanished into Han Li's body in the blink of an eye. Taoist Zai was currently seated with its legs crossed somewhere in Han Li's body, and a burst of white light suddenly flashed nearby, then transformed into none other than the flame of essence. At this moment, the flame of essence was in its humanoid form, and not only had it grown up significantly, its facial features had become even more detailed and intricate. Most importantly, the aura that it was giving off was several times more formidable than before, and waves of scorching heat were sweeping out of the white flames around its body. Taoist Zai opened his eyes, and its brows furrowed slightly as it distanced itself slightly from the tiny fiery figure. The flame of essence opened its mouth, and a high zenith pill flew out from within. However, this pill was different from the other high zenith pills in that it was riddled with a series of silver patterns, which formed the visage of a three-legged golden crow, and it was also giving off a far more formidable aura than the other pills. The tiny fiery figure tossed the high zenith pill upward, and it vanished into thin air amid a burst of spatial fluctuations. Inside the palace, a barely detectable hint of elation flashed through Han Li's eyes as he made his way toward Taoist Hu Yan and the others. Right at this moment, two streaks of light suddenly descended from above, then faded to reveal a pair of figures. They were none other than Zhu Wang and Gong Shuji, and as soon as they arrived in the palace, they immediately took in the chaotic scenes around them. Everyone's attention was instantly drawn to the duo, and a benevolent smile appeared on Gong Shuji's face as he remarked, "Well, well, well, it looks like there's quite a bit going on here." His voice wasn't very loud, but it was clearly audible to everyone inside the palace. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly at the sight of Gong Shuji. He didn't know who this man was, but a sense of foreboding had welled up in his heart nonetheless, as he was completely unable to glean the man's cultivation base. Meanwhile, Luo Chinghai was observing Zhu Wang with his brows furrowed slightly in befuddlement. Gong Shuji swept his gaze across everyone in the hall, and his smile grew even wider as he mused, "Looks like it's my lucky day today. Not only have I run into so many reincarnation palace cultivators in one place, there are quite a few big fish among you. I really did make the right decision to come here." As soon as his voice trailed off, a near-transparent light barrier slowly unfurled around him, instantly enveloping the entire golden palace. Enveloped within Gong Shuji's spirit domain, everyone hurriedly began to inspect the changes that had taken place in themselves and the environment around them. Han Li was holding tightly onto his azure bamboo cloudswarm sword, and thin arcs of lightning were dancing over its surface. He discovered that the semi-transparent spirit domain wasn't giving off any energy fluctuations, as if it almost didn't exist, and that only made him feel even more uneasy. Zhu Wang took a step forward, then looked down at everyone in the palace with a haughty expression as she declared, "Esteemed immortal envoy Gongshu of the heavenly court is here. Come and pay your respects." Everyone's expressions changed slightly upon hearing this. The title of Immortal Envoy meant that not only was this person an important figure in the heavenly court, it also indicated that he had to be at least an early high zenith stage Jade Immortal. Taoist Hu Yan and Yun Nai exchanged a wary glance upon hearing this, while the pair of Southern Dawn race Golden Immortals were also looking on with tightly furrowed brows. As for Han Li, he immediately recalled the true immortal by the name of He Kang that he had encountered while opposing the Stemborer Queen back in the spirit realm. He Kang had proclaimed himself to be an immortal emissary, and that he was under the direct command of an immortal envoy. It was also from He Kang that Han Li found out for the first time that the spirit refinement technique was a forbidden technique in the Immortal Realm, and that anyone who cultivated it would be hunted down by immortal envoys and emissaries. After some hesitation, Luo Chinghai slowly strode over to Gong Shuji, then extended a respectful bow as he greeted, Luo Chinghai of the vast Flow Palace pays his respects to the esteemed immortal envoy. Grand Palace Master Luo, your vast Flow Palace has been causing quite a bit of trouble for our northern glacial immortal palace over the years, Gong Shuji remarked with a smile. Luo Chinghai was completely unfazed as he continued in a respectful manner. Our vast Flow Palace has always followed the rules stipulated by the Heavenly Court, and we've never gotten ourselves involved with evil forces like the Reincarnation Palace. Seeing as you've come here to eradicate these Reincarnation Palace cultivators, all of us will leave now so we won't get in your way. He gave Nan Kameng and the others a nod as he spoke, gesturing for them to leave. However, right at this moment, a glimmer of golden light suddenly flashed over the semi-transparent light barrier, and the entire spirit domain began to give off bursts of formidable law power fluctuations. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly, and it felt to him as if all of the world's origin chi had been completely frozen and immobilized. What is the meaning of this, esteemed immortal envoy? Luo Chinghai asked. No one is allowed to leave until I've made sense of the situation here, Gong Shuji replied. Luo Chinghai, you deceived us and trapped us in that lake, and now you've collaborated with these reincarnation disciple scoundrels to kill Palace Master Zio. I bet you're already a member of the Reincarnation Palace yourself, Zhu Wang accused. A wry smile appeared on Luo Chinghai's face as he argued. That's not the case, Deputy Palace Master Zhu. Back at the lake, I could tell that the restriction you were trapped in was quite formidable, so I decided to turn back to find Palace Master Zio so that we could save you together. Unfortunately, I was delayed by the events here, and that's why I wasn't able to make it back to you. As for Palace Master Zio, I swear on my life that I harbored no animosity toward him, and I certainly had no intention of harming him. Speaking of which, did something happen to him? I didn't see him at all on the way here. He swept his gaze subtly over a few of the other figures in the palace as he spoke, clearly trying to shift the blame onto others. A furious look appeared on Zhu Wang's face, and she was just about to say something else, only to be stopped by Gong Shuji. Over the years, Zio Jinhen has always been plotting to unite the entire northern glacial immortal region, while our heavenly court has always been against the idea. However, he refused to listen to orders, and now that he's perished, I suppose I can only say that he's fallen onto his own sword, Gong Shuji said. Luo Chinghai feigned a shocked expression as he exclaimed, "What? Palace Master Zio has passed away." Gong Shuji paid no heed to him as he continued. Having said that, it seems like his actions have inadvertently led to a good outcome for me. At the same time, a burst of tremendous, invisible force suddenly descended upon everyone in the hall from all directions, and they hurriedly released their own spirit domains to protect themselves. Han Li and the others were all gathered together, and their spirit domains were stacked on top of one another in an attempt to ward off this immense pressure, but the effects were virtually negligible. What kind of law power is this? Ayang Kuishan asked as a faint sheen of sweat began to appear on his forehead. It seems to be some type of chi laws, and this man's mastery over law powers is superior even to Feng Tiandu, Taoist Huyan mused with a grim expression. Meanwhile, Han Li remained silent, but his mind was racing, and he was already contemplating how to make an escape. However, he had to wait for the right opportunity to present itself. It seemed that the sense of foreboding that he had felt earlier was warranted. In hindsight, with so many important figures of the northern glacial immortal region clashing in one place, it was almost inevitable that a transcendent figure would arrive to oversee proceedings. Given his current mid-golden immortal stage cultivation base and his mastery over the laws of time, he was virtually invincible among golden immortals, but he still couldn't oppose a high zenith stage jade immortal. Ultimately, he could only blame himself for staying too long. As a true immortal, Nan Keming was naturally faring even worse than all of the golden immortals in the palace. Even though she was situated in Luo Chinghai's spirit domain, he was still struck by a sense of asphyxiation and excruciating pain all over his entire body. His ears were also buzzing so loudly that he was barely even able to hear anything else. Luo Chinghai could see the terrible condition that his beloved disciple was in, and he was finally unable to suppress his temper any longer as he made a grabbing motion with both hands, instantly conjuring up a massive vortex of blue light that devoured Gong Shuji in the blink of an eye. A series of indistinct water dragons were surging through the vortex, which was constantly shrinking in size, compressing toward the center with tremendous force, as if it were attempting to pulverize whoever was trapped inside. However, there seemed to be an invisible wall of qi between Gong Shuji and the wavy vortex, and no matter how much pressure the vortex exerted upon the wall of qi, it was unable to break through. Luo Chinghai wasn't surprised to see this, and he continued to constrict the vortex even further while giving a nod to the other vast flow palace cultivators. Having just forcibly elevated himself to the high zenith stage, he was currently severely taxed, so even just trapping Gong Shuji on a temporary basis was proving to be a struggle for him. The four vast flow palace golden immortals immediately sprang into action, positioning themselves around Luo Chinghai and Nan Keming before each of them summoned a jade badge. A collective incantation rang out as the images of the ancient sea beasts on the badges began to glow radiantly, with each of them releasing a burst of blue light that connected together to form a square formation. Before long, the complexions of the four golden immortals had turned very pale, clearly indicating that they were under immense strain, and a series of extremely complex patterns began to appear on the ground, giving off formidable spatial fluctuations. I heard that in the past, 4 separate formations had to be set up in order to unleash the 4 seas roaming formation, yet to think that you're able to accomplish the same thing with just a set of 4 jade badges. How impressive, Grand Palace Master Luo, Gong Shuji remarked from within the wavy vortex with a hint of approval in his voice. Luo Chinghai offered no response as he began to make a rapid string of hand seals. The 4 golden immortals had indeed just unleashed the 4 seas roaming formation, but it was only a simplified version, so it naturally couldn't compare with the original, but it would still be enough to help them escape from this place. The patterns on the ground at the center of the formation were becoming brighter and brighter, while the spatial fluctuations emanating from within were also becoming more and more formidable. However, right as the formation was about to be activated, the wavy vortex suddenly exploded. A layer of chaotic white qi had appeared around Gong Shuji, and it was only about 3 inches away from his body, but it was raging like a ferocious storm and seemed to contain tremendous power. Didn't I just say that no one is allowed to leave until I've had a chance to make sense of the situation here? Gong Shuji asked, and even though the smile on his face remained unchanged, all of the vast flow palace cultivators felt chills run down their spines at the sight of it. Immediately thereafter, Gong Shuji reached out with one hand before clenching it into a tight fist, and 4 loud thumps rang out in succession as the badges in the hands of the 4 golden immortals exploded on after the other. As a result, the formation also exploded before scattering in all directions as countless specks of blue light. The 4 golden immortals threw up a mouthful of blood in unison, and 2 of them collapsed to the ground. The fair-skinned scholar hurriedly flipped a hand over to produce a pair of pills, which he fed to the collapsed golden immortals. Inside Gong Shuji's spirit domain, the world's origin qi had completely ceased flowing, and no one was able to draw upon the world's origin qi outside the spirit domain to replenish their immortal spiritual power reserves, so they could only do so by using pills and immortal origin stones. Gong Shuji took a glance at Luo Chinghai, and a hint of derision flashed through his eyes as he began to make his way toward Han Li. While passing by the vast Flow Palace cultivators, everyone saw a patch of space suddenly warp and twist, following which the two collapsed vast Flow Palace golden immortals were crushed into the ground, instantly reduced to two piles of mangled flesh and bones. Two blue nascent souls flew out of their remains, then rushed toward Luo Chinghai in a blind panic, but they weren't able to get very far before they were caught by a burst of qi and dragged up Gong Shuji's sleeve. Luo Chinghai became even more furious upon seeing this, but in the end he could only look on with tightly clenched fists. Kai Lejiao, Taoist Hu Yan, Worm 3. The three of you have committed quite a few transgressions, particularly you, Gong Shuji said as he stopped in his tracks and pointed a finger at the elderly woman from the Southern Dawn race. A perplexed look flashed through Taoist Hu Yan's eyes as he cast his gaze toward the elderly woman. It was clear that he had heard of Worm 3 before, but was unaware that the elderly woman was Worm 3 in disguise. Worm 3's expression stiffened slightly, but there wasn't much fear in her eyes as she looked back at Gong Shuji. However, the same couldn't be said for the elderly man beside her. Meanwhile, Yun Nai turned to Taoist Hu Yan with a concerned look in her eyes. I've been looking everywhere for you three, but the infernal frost immortal manor had gathered all of you in one place. This is fantastic. It'll certainly save me a great deal of trouble, Gong Shuji continued as his smile widened even further. As soon as his voice trailed off, he suddenly raised an eyebrow as his gaze fell upon the living corpses seated on the golden chair. Han Li's heart stirred slightly upon seeing this, and he immediately yelled, "Everyone, all of us have played a hand in Xiao Jinhin's demise, so we're now in complete opposition against the Immortal Palace. This immortal envoy has clearly trapped all of us in his spirit domain with the intention of killing us all, so the only chance that we have at survival is to work together." Gong Shuji's attention was drawn to Han Li upon hearing this, but he merely watched Han Li with a smile, making no intention to stop him, as if what Han Li was saying had nothing to do with him. A wry smile appeared on Luo Chinghai's face upon hearing this. In the wake of Han Li's declaration, his involvement in Xiao Jinhin's demise was virtually set in stone. Even though he wasn't actually a direct participant, Gong Shuji was certainly not going to believe that. However, he wasn't overly bothered by this. Han Li was correct in saying that Gong Shuji clearly harbored intentions of killing everyone in the palace, so he had no choice but to work with everyone else anyway. In that case, there was nothing for him to hesitate about. If he could somehow survive this ordeal, then he would just have to lead the vast Flow Palace to defect to the Reincarnation Palace, which had already tried to recruit the vast Flow Palace on many past occasions. Take this, Menger. It'll help you better withstand his spirit domain. I may not be able to look after you once the battle begins, Luo Chinghai said to Nan Kemeng as he handed the latter a longan-sized blue bead. He then taught him a mantra for a secret technique through voice transmission. Nan Kemeng's complexion was still very pale, but he reassured, "Don't worry, master, I'll be fine." He then accepted the blue bead and promptly swallowed it, then began to chant an incantation, upon which a layer of gentle blue light emerged over her lower abdomen, then swelled to form a blue light barrier with a radius of around 10 feet to encompass her entire body. Nan Kemeng instantly felt as if he had been enveloped in a layer of gentle force that alleviated much of the crushing pressure and sense of asphyxiation that were weighing down upon him. A hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this. That's a profound heavenly spirit domain. Luo Chinghai had used a profound heavenly treasure to help Nan Kemeng conjure up a faux spirit domain to ward off the power of Gong Shuji's spirit domain. The fact that he was doing this indicated that he had already decided to accept Han Li's proposal. Just like Luo Chinghai, everyone else had also realized that the only chance at survival that they had was to work together, and thus, all of them positioned themselves around Gong Shuji and Zhu Weiying, trapping them in an encirclement. What do you all think you're doing? How dare you display such blatant disrespect to immortal envoy Gongshu? Are you trying to oppose the heavenly court? Despite the brave front that Zhu Weiying was putting up, she unconsciously sidled up a little closer to Gong Shuji, and it was clear that she was feeling the pressure. Looks like all of you think that you can beat me thanks to your numbers advantage, but if that really were the case, then why would anyone bother to cultivate? How unfortunate. I wonder how long it'll take the northern glacial immortal region to recover after today. Gong Shuji lamented as he shook his head with a forlorn expression. As soon as his voice trailed off, a sharp ringing sound suddenly rang out in the surrounding space. Everyone in the palace was instantly struck by a burst of sharp pain in their eardrums, while the tremendous pressure surging toward them from all directions became several times more formidable. Luo Chinghai immediately sprang into action, making a hand seal to conjure up a ball of blue light, which rapidly swelled in size to encompass everyone within it like a turbulent wave. After being encompassed within the blue light barrier, the pressure on everyone was instantly lessened somewhat. Looks like you've made some decent progress in mastering the laws of the sea. Your crimes aren't all that severe, and I was originally only planning to make you serve as an immortal servant for 1,000,000 years as a punishment, but you've insisted on digging your own grave, Gong Shuji remarked with a forlorn expression. Taoist Hu Yan and the others also quickly followed suit, and light barriers of different colors emerged one after the other to encompass the entire palace, while different types of law power fluctuations surged toward Gong Shuji and Zhu Weiying. However, Han Li had refrained from revealing his time spirit domain this entire time. His time law powers had been severely taxed during the prior battle, and while he hadn't completely run out, he also couldn't afford to use it without discretion. In the face of a high zenith stage Jade Immortal, he had to be extremely meticulous, using every single ounce of his law powers where they would truly make a difference. Gong Shuji was instantly inundated by a multitude of spirit domains, but his expression remained completely unchanged. He casually swept a sleeve through the air, and 2 bursts of golden light emerged to form a pair of halberd-wielding puppets that were clad in golden armor. As soon as the pair of puppets emerged, golden light that was filled with incredibly abundant metal law power fluctuations erupted out of their bodies, and their auras were comparable to those of late golden immortal cultivators. "Go," Gong Shuji ordered, and the pair of golden-armored puppets instantly charged at Taoist Hu Yan and Luo Chinghai. "Leave this puppet to us, Palace Master," the fair-skinned scholar said as he and the other vast flow palace golden immortal charged at the oncoming golden-armored puppet. Meanwhile, Ayang Kuishan and the other Tao Lord had stepped forward to oppose the other puppet, while Yun Nai began drifting toward Zhu Weiying. A hint of concern flashed through Taoist Hu Yan's eyes upon seeing this. Yun Nai had already sustained injuries while rescuing him earlier, so she was not in prime condition. However, given the current situation, he couldn't afford to get distracted. After all, Gong Shuji was a bona fide high zenith stage Jade Immortal, and even with Han Li, Worm 3, Kai Legio, and Luo Chinghai on his side, their chances of victory were probably still slim to none. At this point, there's no use in thinking about anything else. Only by giving it our all will we have any chance at survival, Han Li declared through voice transmission. "Your time law powers are extremely formidable, fellow Taoist Li, so we'll need you to make some significant contributions when it counts," Luo Chinghai said in a grim voice. I'll be sure to do my best, and similarly, I hope that you'll also unleash your full power. As the sect master of the vast Flow Palace, I'm sure you have some more tricks up your sleeve, Han Li replied. Luo Chinghai offered no response to this, and at the same time, Gong Shuji was already making his first move. He began making a string of complex hand seals, and bursts of viscous mist that were of a milky white color emerged behind Han Li and the others, then took on the form of a series of misty humanoid figures. Everyone's expressions changed drastically upon seeing this. As it turned out, the outlines of these misty figures were identical to theirs, and it was as if they were their shadows. What was even more astonishing to them was that the auras of these misty figures were also extremely similar to their own. Are these domain spirits? Taoist Huyan mused with tightly furrowed brows. It was said that once one's spirit domain reached the late spirit form stage, it would be capable of conjuring up domain spirits similar to living beings, and these domain spirits were similar in nature to puppets and Tao warriors, while their powers depended on the cultivation base and law powers of the owner of the spirit domain. I don't think so, Luo Chinghai replied. If these were spirit domains, then they wouldn't be so similar to us. I think this is another ability of his Qi law powers. Before they had a chance to speculate any further on this matter, the misty figures were already charging at them. Taoist Huyan raised the longsword in his hand, and crimson flames were revolving around its blade as he slashed it horizontally toward the oncoming misty figure. A burst of crimson light emerged around the misty figure as well, and scorching flames rose up over its entire body as it also summoned a fiery longsword before slashing it through the air. The two fiery swords clashed with a resounding boom, and a wall of fire rose up between Taoist Huyan and the misty figure. The two of them then flew through the wall of fire in unison before their swords clashed once again. On the other side, the misty figure that was facing Luo Chinghai had turned into a cloud of water vapor that seemed to have no substantial form, and it was sending waves upon waves crashing into Luo Chinghai's defenses. As for Worm 3 and Kai Legio, they were also being harassed by the same misty figures. Meanwhile, Han Li was holding his azure bamboo cloud swarm sword tightly, while locked in a standoff against his corresponding misty figure. It seemed that even the misty figure's personality was rather similar to his, and it also adopted a more cautious approach, watching him in a still manner instead of striking right away. Gong Shuji was standing somewhere further away with his arms crossed, and it seemed that he wasn't planning to get involved at all. All of a sudden, Han Li launched himself forward, and as he did so, he abruptly vanished out of thin air. In the next instant, he reappeared behind the misty figure before piercing his sword diagonally toward his opponent. He had just used his reversal true axis to drastically enhance his own speed, so the sword strike had come very abruptly. Right as the tip of his sword was about to pierce into the misty figure's abdomen, it also vanished from the spot, leaving nothing more than a faint wisp of residual mist behind. Could it be that this thing possesses the same abilities as me? Han Li's heart jolted slightly as he disappeared from the spot once again. As soon as he reappeared, he immediately swept his sword horizontally behind him, and sure enough, the misty figure appeared right before him before lashing out with its sword as well. A sharp clang rang out, and Han Li was forced back several steps by the force of the clash. The misty figure was also sent sliding back, while the sword in its hand was destroyed by streaks of azure sword chi sweeping toward it. Gong Shuji's brows furrowed ever so slightly upon seeing this, and he focused his gaze on the azure bamboo cloud swarm sword in Han Li's hand. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he sized up the misty figure standing before him. White mist gently swirled around the misty figure's hand, and another longsword slowly took shape. What on earth is this thing? Han Li activated his bright sight spirit eyes to find that each of the misty figures had a ball of light in their body that was pulsing in a rhythmic fashion. The misty figure that was battling Taoist Hu Yan had a ball of crimson light in its body. The misty figure facing Luo Chinghai had a blue one, while the ball of light within Han Li's assailant was a light golden color. However, aside from that, Han Li wasn't able to spot anything else remarkable about these misty figures. Right as he was wondering whether he should summon his mantra treasured axis to take a closer look, a slightly feeble voice suddenly rang out in his mind, and it belonged to none other than Nan Kemeng. At this moment, everyone else around Han Li could hear his voice as well. These misty figures have no substantial forms, but all of them have law powers in their bodies that correspond with yours. Right above each of their heads is a white thread that's invisible to the naked eye, and these threads are connected to the immortal envoy's fingertips. At the same time, there's also a thread connecting their hearts to yours. Han Li took a subtle glance at Gong Shuji's crossed arms upon hearing this, and sure enough, he could see Gong Shuji's fingers making tiny movements that were barely detectable. It was as if he were a puppeteer that was controlling some puppets on strings. While battling the misty figure before him, Han Li began to inspect his surroundings, to find that all of the other misty figures were wielding the same law powers as the opponents that they had been assigned to. A look of realization instantly appeared on his face as he called out through voice transmission. "Don't waste any more energy on fighting these misty figures, fellow Taoists. All of them are reflections of us that have been conjured up by the immortal envoy's law powers, so their powers are virtually identical to ours, and it won't be an easy task for us to defeat them." I've arrived at this realization myself as well, but how are we supposed to defeat these things? Luo Chinghai asked. "Do not waste any more of your law powers. These reflections are connected to us through threads of mist, and their law powers are coming straight out of our bodies," Han Li revealed. "No wonder I could feel my law powers being expended so quickly. The rate of expenditure is almost twice the normal rate for me," Taoist Hu Yan exclaimed. "He's trying to use these things to wear us down, and once our law powers are completely exhausted, we'll be completely at his mercy," Worm 3 said. "All right, now that we've identified the crux of the matter, does anyone have a solution?" Kai Ligio asked. "These figures possess no intelligence and are being controlled solely by the immortal envoy. Ultimately, this is just an ability of his, so these are nothing more than manifestations of his law powers. All we need to do is stop using our law powers for now and focus all of our attacks on Gong Shuji himself. That's the best solution I can think of right now," Han Li proposed. "Sounds good to me. If things continue like this, we'll be dead soon anyway, so we may as well make a final stand," Taoist Hu Yan chimed in agreement. Luo Chinghai took a glance at Nan Kemeng, and upon receiving a nod from the latter, he immediately declared, "I also agree with this course of action." Worm 3 and Kai Ligio also expressed their approval of this idea, and with that, all of 5 of them immediately sprang into action. The crimson flames over Taoist Hu Yan's body were instantly snuffed out, and he spun around in midair, rising up like a tornado before hurtling directly toward the misty figure in front of him. The flames around the misty figure's body also faded, as it rushed at Taoist Hu Yan in the exact same fashion. The two of them clashed in midair with a resounding boom, and Taoist Hu Yan allowed himself to be sent flying by the force of the clash, using it to launch himself at Gong Shuji. Almost at the exact same moment, Han Li and the others also employed various strategies to disengage themselves from their battles against the misty figures before rushing at Gong Shuji. A hint of surprise flashed through Gong Shuji's eyes upon seeing this. "Have you already seen through it? It appears I may have underestimated all of you. Having said that, it's not like it makes any difference," he chuckled, and as soon as his voice trailed off, he abruptly made a wrenching motion with his left hand, upon which all of the misty figures were pulled toward him by a burst of tremendous force, reappearing directly in the paths of Han Li and the others in the blink of an eye. You think that it'll somehow make a difference just because you're not using your law powers. You still stand no chance at all. Gong Shuji jeered like a cat toying with some mice. Right at this moment, a burst of golden ripples suddenly appeared behind him, and Han Li abruptly emerged out of thin air, then lashed out with his azure bamboo cloud swarm sword. The sword was flashing with golden lightning, and right as it was about to strike Gong Shuji's waist, he suddenly vanished amid a flash of white light, replaced by the misty figures in the visage of Han Li. In just the blink of an eye, he had managed to transpose himself with the misty figure, which was struck by the azure bamboo cloud swarm sword and completely torn apart. Meanwhile, Gong Shuji reappeared not far away, and the smile on his face finally faded as a cold and furious look appeared on his face. A hint of disappointment appeared on Han Li's face in the wake of his failed attack, while Gong Shuji's brows furrowed tightly as he mused, "Time law powers. Were you the one who killed Elder Tao's son, Tao Yu? I can't think of anyone else in this immortal region cultivating the mantra axis scripture." "That's right, I'm the one who killed him," Han Li admitted with a bold grin. Gong Shuji's expression darkened even further as he said, "You can smile all you want now, but I bet you're not going to be able to smile any longer once I take you back to Elder Tao. He's an expert in crafting nascent souls into nascent soul lamps, and you'll be burning for at least 100,000 years at Tao Yu's altar. You'll be in such excruciating pain that you'll wish you had been refined into a golden soul pill instead." Han Li's expression remained completely unchanged as he retorted, "I've had a golden soul pill before, but I wonder what a pill refined using a jade immortal's nascent soul will taste like." As soon as his voice trailed off, he took a step forward and launched himself at Gong Shuji once again. "How insolent!" A cold look appeared on Gong Shuji's face, and he continued to control the misty figures that were battling Taoist Hu Yan and the others with his left hand, while simultaneously making a grabbing motion with his right hand to summon a slender longsword that looked as if it had been fashioned out of white jade. As the sword was slashed through the air, an indistinct burst of qi seemed to flash through the air, then transformed into a series of extremely thin blade projections as it swept toward Han Li. Han Li immediately activated his bright sight spirit eyes, which allowed him to identify the trajectories of these blade projections. At the same time, he slashed his sword through the air repeatedly, unleashing layers upon layers of azure sword qi that formed a protective barrier around him, keeping all of the oncoming blade projections at bay. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel a little awestruck. It was incredible to him that someone was able to utilize their law powers to this extent. This was truly not a level of mastery that a golden immortal could hope to reach. Due to the fact that he was constantly being suppressed by Gong Shuji's spirit domain, it took Han Li a great deal of effort to finally pierce through the layers of blade projections, to close down the distance between himself and Gong Shuji. He made a hand seal with one hand while slashing his sword through the air with the other, and all of the layers of azure sword qi around him instantly bloomed like a lotus flower before hurtling toward Gong Shuji at once. Gong Shuji's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he raised his sword horizontally in front of him, then slashed it through the air with a flick of his wrist to conjure up a huge wall of white qi. A string of loud clangs rang out incessantly within the palace, and all of the streaks of azure sword qi pierced into the wall of white qi, but were unable to make it all the way through. A hint of disappointment appeared in Gong Shuji's eyes upon seeing this, and he remarked, "Looks like I overestimated you." However, right at this moment, a smile suddenly appeared on Han Li's face as he gently flicked his azure bamboo cloud swarm sword with his finger, and all of the streaks of azure sword chi abruptly exploded in unison, releasing an extremely formidable shockwave that blasted a huge hole into the wall of white chi. The shockwaves continued to proliferate outward, causing the entire palace to tremble violently. The green pill cauldron originally served as the core of this golden palace, but now that the cauldron had been eaten by Jin Tong and most of the restrictions inscribed onto the ground had been destroyed, a series of cracks began to appear on the walls in the face of these devastating shockwaves. Gong Shuji was situated closest to the explosion, and he couldn't help but stumble back in retreat in the face of these shockwaves. Before he had a chance to steady himself, a crimson figure abruptly appeared behind him. He immediately swung around in a manner that seemed to defy the laws of physics, and he discovered that it was Taoist Hu Yan who had arrived on the scene and was slashing his fiery, long sword directly at his head. Gong Shuji immediately raised the slender longsword in his hand to parry the attack, and a sharp clang rang out as the pair of swords clashed, sending flames and sword chi erupting in all directions. In the instant that the two swords clashed, a crimson gourd suddenly flew out of the cloth pouch on Taoist Hu Yan's back, and the opening of the gourd was aimed diagonally downward, directly facing Gong Shuji as it hovered above both of their heads. The ancient runes on the surface of the gourd were flashing incessantly, and it was giving off waves of scorching heat. Immediately thereafter, the stopper of the gourd flew out on its own with a loud pop. A loud draconic roar instantly rang out across the entire palace, and a mighty black dragon flew out of the opening of the gourd. The dragon had black flames all over its body, and it opened its mouth before biting down viciously upon Gong Shuji. "Thou Lord Bailey," Luo Chinghai exclaimed upon seeing this. A hint of enlightenment flashed through Han Li's eyes upon hearing this, and he realized that Taoist Hu Yan had most likely not been trying to secure a high zenith pill for himself. Instead, it was to save Bailey Yan, who he had been carrying in that gourd of his this entire time. In the wake of the internal conflict in the Blaze Dragon Dao orchestrated by Xiao Jinhen, Ayang Kuishan and many of the other Dao lords had worked with the northern glacial Immortal Palace to surround Bailey Yan, and not only did they foil his plan for reaching the high zenith stage, a plan that he had been working toward for countless years, they also managed to severely wound him, but he was ultimately able to get away. Fortunately, Taoist Hu Yan was also able to get away from the northern glacial Immortal Palace, and after leaving the Blaze Dragon Dao, he reunited with Bailey Yan, and now the two of them were here in the Infernal Frost Immortal Palace. However, what Han Li wanted to know was how Taoist Hu Yan had been aware in advance that there were high zenith pills in the Immortal Manor. As soon as Bailey Yan flew out of the Crimson Gourd, Taoist Hu Yan had already darted back in retreat. Scorching black flames erupted out of the black blaze dragon's mouth to instantly inundate Gong Shuji, and the misty figures that he was controlling instantly slowed down significantly, as if Gong Shuji had temporarily lost control over them. Everyone immediately pounced on this opportunity to destroy the misty figures, following which they hurriedly gathered around Gong Shuji and the Blaze Dragon. Close to 20 seconds later, the Blaze Dragon closed its cavernous mouth, and it shrank down rapidly until it was no larger than the average snake. The high zenith pill has been beneficial to my recovery and allowed me to expel the karmic fire in my body, but I need more time to refine it, so this is all I can do to help you for now, the Blaze Dragon said. That's fine, go back into the gourd to rest, Taoist Hu Yan replied. Bailey Yan immediately flew into the gourd upon hearing this, and Taoist Hu Yan stowed the gourd back into the cloth pouch on his back. All of this had taken place in the blink of an eye, and Luo Chinghai and the others were still reeling a little. However, thankfully, Bailey Yan's attack had allowed them to get rid of those pesky Misty figures while also trapping Gong Shuji. Everyone, we need to take advantage of this opportunity to refine Gong Shuji's physical body, then capture his nascent soul, Luo Chinghai urged. Everyone immediately sprang into action upon hearing this, unleashing a barrage of attacks into the black flames around Gong Shuji. Crimson flame, blue light, golden lightning. All manners of attacks surged into the black flames from all directions, compressing it into a fireball that was only around 10 feet in size. Han Li was scrutinizing the interior of the fireball intently with his bright-sight spirit eyes, and he discovered that there was still a spherical, semi-transparent wall of qi around Gong Shuji's body that was keeping all of the flames and attacks at bay. Furthermore, a layer of faint red light had appeared over the wall of qi, and it was becoming brighter and brighter. A hint of alarm flashed through everyone's eyes upon seeing this, and they immediately attempted to take evasive measures, but it was already too late. A burst of incredibly powerful shockwaves erupted in all directions, scattering all of the black flames and everyone's attacks before sending them flying back through the air. The Golden Palace was already on the verge of collapse, and it was finally unable to hold itself together any longer, falling in a heap to be reduced to a pile of rubble. However, before everyone had a chance to stand up from amid the rubble, Gong Shuji had already emerged from the wreckage, and he sighed. I was going to invite all of you to come to our heavenly court to repent for your crime, so that you can perhaps change your ways, but it seems that my kindness is being treated as weakness. As soon as his voice trailed off, he swept his hands through the air, and 5 bursts of radiant light emerged over his fingertips. 5 feathers from some type of unknown bird then flew out from within before hurtling toward Han Lin and the others. The light radiating from the feathers had an illusory quality to it, and it was also giving off bursts of subtle law power fluctuations. A sense of foreboding welled up in his heart upon seeing this, and he hurriedly raised his sword to defend himself. With a flick of Worm 3's wrist, a silver bracelet that was riddled with ancient patterns slipped off her wrist, then began to revolve in front of her while radiating a vast expanse of bright silver light. Meanwhile, Kai Legio raised both hands in front of himself to summon a golden badge, which transformed into a shimmering golden shield in the blink of an eye. A string of loud clangs rang out one after another within the palace, and the sword in Han Li's hand was bent to an extreme degree, with its blade crashing heavily into his chest, sending him flying thousands of feet before crashing into a mountain face. Luo Chinghai had summoned a jade fan treasure to protect himself, but it had been completely pulverized by one of the azure feathers, and a huge hole was punched into his chest, while his entire body was slammed into the ground. Worm 3's silver bracelet was shattered, and she was also sent flying through the air, but didn't appear to have sustained any injuries. As for Kai Legio, his golden shield was also destroyed by an azure feather, which then pierced straight through his head, and in the blink of an eye, his nascent soul was captured by Gong Shuji. In order to pick up his crimson gourd, Taoist Hu Yan was already a split second slower to react than everyone else, and by the time he looked up, one of the azure feathers was already no more than 3 feet away from his chest, so there was no time for him to take evasive measures. In this dire situation, a figure suddenly shot forth from the side, then positioned themselves in front of him as a meat shield. Yun Nai, both Taoist Hu Yan and Ayang Kuishan exclaimed in unison. The former hurriedly grabbed her by the arm in an attempt to drag her away, while the latter's body turned bright red as he unleashed a secret technique to drastically enhance his own speed, arriving in front of Yun Nai an instant before the feather reached her. A dull thump rang out as the feather pierced through several protective light barriers, before punching through Ayang Kuishan's glabella, pulverizing both his head and his consciousness. The 3 crashed heavily into one another, and were sent flying together before falling to the ground. A stunned look appeared on Yun Nai's face as she hurriedly rolled Ayang Kuishan over, only to find that his eyes had already glazed over, but there was a satisfied smile hanging on his lips. A complex look appeared on Taoist Hu Yan's face upon seeing this. Yun Nai took a glance at Taoist Hu Yan, then turned her gaze back to Ayang Kuishan, and for the first time in countless years, tears began to well up in her eyes. She had actually met Ayang Kuishan before Taoist Hu Yan in the Blaze Dragon Dao, and the two of them had embarked on multiple journeys together. She had always been aware of his feelings, but she had never been able to reciprocate them. Right at this moment, a golden nascent soul suddenly flew out of Ayang Kuishan's danchan, and it looked as if it could fade out of existence at any moment, but it was still staring intently at Yun Nai with its tiny eyes. Was it really worth it? Yun Nai asked with tear-filled eyes. My entire life, I've pursued greater power in the hope that I'll be able to attain freedom and do whatever I please someday. Traveling this immortal region to my heart's content with my beloved Tao partner. Unfortunately, the more advanced my cultivation base became, the more I was weighed down by responsibilities. For the first time, I've been able to act completely selfishly and for my own sake, so how was it not worth it? The nascent soul replied in a feeble voice. You've earned my admiration, Ayang Kuishan. Rest assured, I'll do everything in my power to resurrect you. Taoist Hu Yan promised as he flipped a hand over to produce a palm-sized sandalwood box. Ayang Kuishan took a glance at him, then silently flew into the box. Meanwhile, Han Li had already flown back from the mountain face and descended beside Taoist Hu Yan. He had naturally witnessed Ayang Kuishan sacrifice himself for Yun Nai just now, and his expression remained unchanged. But internally, his opinion of Ayang Kuishan had been improved significantly. Worm 3 took a glance at Kai Lejiao's body, then also flew over to join Han Li and the others. As for Luo Chinghai, he was laying completely still, and it was unclear whether he was dead or unconscious. Perhaps it was because unleashing those feathers had been too taxing on him. But in any case, Gong Shuji didn't unleash any further attacks, instead remaining completely still on the spot. Why have you refrained from using your time, law powers, this entire time? Are you trying to save your energy so you can attempt to make an escape at the right opportunity? Worm 3 asked through voice transmission as she turned to Han Li with a cold expression. I have a trump card ability that could perhaps kill Gong Shuji in a single strike, but I've expended too much of my time law powers earlier, so I have to be conservative and only strike at the right moment. Han Li replied with a shake of his head. I hope you're not lying. If we manage to get out of here alive, I'll give you the next level of the spirit refinement technique. At your cultivation base, it's next to impossible to escape from a high zenith stage Jade Immortal, so don't harbor any delusions, Worm 3 said. I'd advise you to also stop holding back, fellow Taoist Worm 3. As Han Li was speaking, he took a seemingly casual glance at his surroundings to discover that the fair-skinned scholar and the other vast flow palace golden immortal had managed to destroy one of the halberd-wielding golden puppets. However, both of them had suffered severe injuries and weren't able to ensure much else aside from self-preservation. Zhu Wang had no intention of sparing them, and she immediately flew in their direction. Nan Keming had also been sent flying by the earlier explosion, and it was unclear where he had fallen. As for the golden immortal from the Blaze Dragon Dao, he was severely outmatched by the remaining halberd-wielding puppet without Ayang Kuishan's assistance, and it wasn't going to take long before he crashed to a defeat. Fellow Taoist Hu Yan, you two should go and help out your fellow Tao Lord. I'll take care of things here, Han Li suddenly said. Taoist Hu Yan was rather taken aback to hear this, and Han Li explained, I'm sure it's already become clear to you that having a numbers advantage doesn't really help us at all against the immortal envoy. If we want to take him down, then we'll have to resort to some unconventional and risky tactics. Fine, we'll do as you say. You always seem to have more tricks up your sleeve, and I can never seem to get a good grasp on you. If we get out of here alive, I'll treat you to an entire jar of my finest wine, Taoist Hu Yan replied with a smile. You better not forget that promise, Han Li chuckled. What exactly do high zenith pills do? Surely it must have some extraordinary effects, considering how desperate Luo Chinghai and the others were to get their hands on these pills. Han Li suddenly asked through voice transmission. High zenith pills are extremely sought after among all golden immortals, but they're just as rare as they are revered, Taoist Hu Yan explained. Could it be that it has something to do with making a breakthrough to the high zenith stage? Han Li asked. That's right. The most important effect of the high zenith pill is that it can help cultivators at the pinnacle of the golden immortal stage ward off the fifth decay, Taoist Hu Yan confirmed with a nod. I see. Han Li was ecstatic to hear this. Given Taoist Hu Yan's explanation, it was clear that high zenith pills to golden immortals were no less important than golden soul pills to true immortals, and they were clearly even more precious. Furthermore, he had managed to obtain the most premium high zenith pill from that entire cauldron, and that was a massive reward to claim. Taoist Hu Yan stowed away Ayang Kuishan's body, then flew toward the remaining halberd-wielding puppet with Yun Nai. Meanwhile, Han Li took a brief moment to inspect his own internal condition, then tightened his grip around his azure bamboo cloudswarm sword as he exchanged a glance with Worm 3, indicating for her to prepare to strike. Right at his moment, a burst of dull rumbling rang out from the golden chair, causing the entire palace to tremble violently. Even though the palace had already collapsed, the chair remained completely unscathed. All of a sudden, the living corpse seated on the chair rose to its feet, and its entire body was giving off radiant gray light. The golden light barrier seemed to have sensed something, and it also began to glow radiantly, while countless palm-sized golden runes emerged within it. However, that still wasn't enough for it to contain the gray light, and before long, thin cracks were beginning to appear on its surface. A burst of elated laughter rang out from within the golden light barrier, and it wasn't very loud, but everyone who heard it was struck by a burst of sharp pain in the head, as if there were countless red-hot needles piercing into their souls. Everyone hurriedly channeled their cultivation arts to protect their souls as they darted back in retreat, with alarmed looks on their faces. Han Li also flew back in retreat like everyone else, while Gong Shuji cast a bewildered gaze toward the golden chair. Zhu Weiying flew over to Gong Shuji's side, then also cast her gaze in the same direction. Inside the light barrier, gray light was churning incessantly, and 9 bursts of gray light that resembled plume of smoke surged out of the light barrier before wrapping themselves around the 9 golden stone pillars, then snapped them with ease. The golden light barrier immediately began to tremble violently as the cracks on its surface widened, following which it exploded with a resounding boom. A figure slowly emerged from the vast expanse of golden light, and it was none other than the middle-aged Taoist priest seated on the golden chair. The Taoist priest wore a faint smile as he walked along with his hands clasped behind his back, and he appeared no different from a normal cultivator. The only remarkable thing about him was that his eyes were entirely gray in color with no whites at all, presenting a rather unsettling sight to behold. A hint of surprise and befuddlement immediately appeared on Gong Shuji's face at the sight of the Taoist priest, while Zhu Weiying asked, "Do you recognize this man, Uncle Gongshu?" "I certainly wasn't expecting to find a gray immortal here. Looks like I really am in luck," Gong Shuji mused as he stared intently at the middle-aged Taoist priest like a hawk. The expressions on the faces of Luo Chinghai and the others all changed drastically upon hearing this, and he immediately swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a burst of blue light that swept up all of the vast Flow Palace cultivators before flying away into the distance. The remaining Tao Lord of the Blaze Dragon Tao also hurriedly flew back to open up some distance between himself and the Taoist priest, while Taoist Hu Yan and Yun Nai exchanged a glance before doing the same. Han Li didn't know why everyone was so wary of the Taoist priest, but he also decided that it was best to maintain his distance, flying over to Taoist Hu Yan's side as he asked through voice transmission, "What is a gray immortal, fellow Taoist Hu Yan?" The soul fragment had told him some things about gray immortals and the gray realm, but he hadn't gone into much detail, and it seemed that everyone was quite fearful of this gray immortal. "You may not have heard about this, fellow Taoist Li, but once upon a time, our northern glacial immortal realm was actually called the Infernal Frost Immortal Region. The entire immortal region was split into two following a major battle, and that was during the invasion of the Gray Immortals. Gray Immortals are sworn enemies of us Immortals, and we don't know exactly where they come from, but it's said that they can devour Immortals. During that battle, all of the sects and powers in the entirety of the Infernal Frost Immortal region joined forces, while also recruiting some reinforcements from other immortal regions. And it was only with their combined powers that they were able to force the Gray Immortals into retreat. However, close to half of all of the immortal region sects were wiped out, and many races were eradicated altogether. Ever since then, no other gray immortals have appeared in this immortal region, Taoist Hu Yan informed. "Why is it that I've never heard of any of this before?" Han Li asked with a stunned expression. "The battle that I mentioned took place a very long time ago, and the Heavenly Court has always intentionally tried to conceal those past events. So only some of the top sects in the northern glacial immortal region, such as the Blaze Dragon Tao and the Vast Flow Palace, are aware of these events. You're still quite young, and you were only in the Blaze Dragon Tao for a very short time, so it's no surprise that you haven't heard about any of this," Taoist Hu Yan explained. What Taoist Hu Yan had just said matched what the soul fragment had described, and with that, Han Li was able to confirm that the soul fragment had been telling the truth, at least in this regard. Right at this moment, a streak of red light descended beside the middle-aged Taoist priest, then faded to reveal Worm 3, who extended a slight bow toward him. "Welcome back to the Immortal Realm, Taoist Master Moyu." Luo Chinghai and the others were all quite alarmed to see this, clearly not expecting Worm 3 to be familiar with this gray immortal. Meanwhile, Han Li was also looking at the middle-aged Taoist priest with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He had already heard from the soul fragment that the Reincarnation Palace had worked with gray immortals in the past, so he wasn't that surprised to see that Worm 3 had ties with this gray immortal, but this didn't match the story that the soul fragment had told him. According to the soul fragment, Moyu was the name of the high zenith stage gray immortal that had triggered the gray immortal invasion of the northern glacial immortal realm, but it had also told him that Moyu was a female disciple under the infernal frost immortal lord, while this gray immortal was clearly a man. So what exactly was the truth? Before Han Li had a chance to ponder this matter any further, Gong Shuji suddenly exclaimed, "So you're Moyu? I had heard that you had gone missing in the wake of that battle all those years ago. Is this where you've been hiding this entire time?" The middle-aged Taoist priest paid no heed to Gong Shuji as he turned to Worm 3 and said, "Oh, I'm surprised there's still someone who remembers me. Who are you?" "I am Worm 3 of the Reincarnation Palace," Worm 3 replied. Red light flashed over her body as she spoke, and in the blink of an eye, she transformed into a beautiful woman in a red dress, but her face was concealed behind a crimson dragon mask. Whim 3, is it? I suppose I owe you a favor now. Who do you want to kill? Moyu asked as he swept his gaze over his surroundings. Worm 3 offered no reply to this, merely pointing a finger in Gong Shuji's direction before flying away to the side. Moyu turned his gaze to Gong Shuji with a faint smile, but he then suddenly turned his attention to Han Li. You're in a real sorry state, kid. You're bringing shame upon the laws of time. I'll chat with you after I've returned this favor, Moyu chuckled, and everyone else present immediately turned to Han Li with peculiar looks in their eyes upon hearing this. How are you related to this gray immortal, fellow Taoist Li? Taoist, Hu Yan asked through voice transmission. That's a bit of a long story. I encountered that soul fragment of his in an underground palace, and I brought it with me after I left. At this point, I still don't know whether he's friend or foe, Han Li replied with a wry smile. Could it be that you really did enter the legendary Moonlight Palace? Taoist Hu Yan exclaimed with wide eyes. It looks like that must have been it, Han Li replied. Meanwhile, Mo Yu's gaze returned to Gong Shuji, and he sighed in a resigned manner. I'm not someone who likes to owe favors to other people, so I'm afraid you're going to have to die here. How would you like to die? How laughable. Your soul has only just been restored, and your cultivation base is still unsteady. You're just bluffing to try and buy time for yourself. Gong Shuji harumphed coldly as he made a hand seal, and 10 misty white figures emerged in front of him, each of which was several times larger than the ones from before, and all of them pounced at Mo Yu at once. Oh crap, you got me. I didn't think you'd see through me so quickly. Are all immortal envoys this smart nowadays? Mo Yu exclaimed as feigned a panicked expression, only to then blast a streak of gray light out of the palm of his hand as he declared, "One attack is all I'll need to kill you." As soon as his voice trailed off, the streak of gray light exploded into countless gray threads, all of which were flying through the air at an incredible speed, before piercing through the bodies of the misty white figures in the blink of an eye. All 10 of the misty figures were instantly rooted to the spot, then exploded into a vast expanse of white mist, much to the surprise and incredulity of Han Li and the others. Those misty figures had caused them no shortage of trouble earlier, yet this gray immortal had just eradicated 10 of them in the blink of an eye. After piercing through the misty figures, the gray threads continued to hurtle directly toward Gong Shuji, who remained completely unfazed as he opened his mouth to release a ball of white light, which transformed into an antiquated white mirror. The antiquated mirror released a burst of white light that was filled with countless runes, and it formed a thick white cocoon of light around his entire body. Moyu immediately switched to a different hand seal upon seeing this, and all of the threads of gray light converged toward a single spot, forming a thick gray arrow in the blink of an eye. A formidable glacial aura was emanating from the arrow, and it was different from any type of law power, but was also not inferior to any of them. A series of gray corkscrews of light also appeared around the arrow, and they began to revolve rapidly while giving off a terrifying screeching sound. As soon as the cocoon of white light took shape, the arrow of gray light also arrived, and the latter struck the former with tremendous force. The white cocoon was instantly shattered like an eggshell to reveal Gong Shuji inside, and the gray arrow had already pierced through his body. A large hole had been punched through his chest, and blood instantly began to flow out of all of his orifices. Just as Mo Yu declared, it had only taken him a single attack to strike down Gong Shuji. Han Li was very much taken aback to see this, but also quite relieved. However, in the next instant, Gong Shuji's body abruptly dissipated into a cloud of white mist, following which he reappeared behind Mo Yu, then immediately opened his mouth to release a burst of dazzling 5-colored light, within which was a semi-transparent crystalline rock. The rock was surrounded by arcs of dazzling 5-colored light, and it was giving off an incredibly destructive aura. Moyu's expression changed drastically upon seeing this, and he hurriedly fled to the side, while a burst of gray flames appeared around him to form a fiery gray barrier. However, it was already too late, and the five-colored rock caught up to him in the blink of an eye, then exploded into a ball of blinding five-colored lightning that inundated his entire body in an instant. The destructive power erupting out of the burst of five-colored lightning was over 10 times more formidable than that of the pill tribulations from before, and the space around the five-colored lightning immediately became severely warped and fractured, looking as if it could shatter at any moment. Arcs of five-colored lightning sprang forth in all directions, causing the surrounding space to tremble violently, and everyone hurriedly took evasive measures, flying back in retreat as quickly as they could. Within the blinding five-colored light, Moyu had vanished without a trace, and it seemed that his body had been completely eradicated. A faint smile appeared on Gong Shuji's face upon seeing this, while Han Li and the others looked on with grim expressions. If Moyu really had been slain, then they would once again be in a dire situation. The five-colored lightning flashed a few times before quickly fading away. All of a sudden, Gong Shuji's expression stiffened as a ball of gray light emerged where the five-colored lightning had been just a moment ago. The ball of light was around the same height as a grown man, and there were wisps of dense gray chi swirling around it. The gray light then parted to reveal Moyu once again, and his complexion was a little pale, but aside from that, he was completely unscathed, and even his clothes were completely undamaged. "You're a gray immortal. How could you possibly have survived heavenly damnation lightning? This is impossible," Gong Shuji exclaimed in incredulity. "I didn't think that you would have a heavenly damnation lightning stone, but unfortunately for you, it's one of the lowest caliber, and that won't be enough to kill me," Moyu said with a shake of his head. Gong Shuji immediately turned and fled toward the entrance of the palace as a streak of white light. "Hey, don't run. I have to keep my promises," Moyu yelled as he swept his right hand through the air, and his left arm instantly exploded into a ball of dense gray light, which transformed into a gray chain that shot forth through the air in a flash. In the next instant, the gray chain appeared around Gong Shuji, then wrapped itself around him in a flash. Bright gray light erupted out of Moyu's body before spreading outward, instantly forming a gray spirit domain with countless gray shadows swirling within it. He then began to chant an incantation, and all of the gray shadows within the spirit domain converged toward a single spot to form an enormous gray dragon's head. The draconic head was riddled with black runes, and it was giving off a terrifying glacial aura that was only becoming more and more formidable by the second. In the instant the draconic head took shape, Han Li and the others were all instantly struck by a burst of sharp pain all over the entirety of their bodies, and they felt as if even their bone marrow were being frozen solid. The protective spiritual light around them was completely ineffective in warding off this glacial aura, and they hurriedly flew away even further to protect themselves. Gong Shuji's expression finally darkened slightly upon seeing this, and he let loose a low roar as balls of dazzling white flames abruptly erupted out of his body. Every single one of these white fireballs were giving off tremendous law power fluctuations, and they were scorching the gray chain intently, while he was also struggling to free himself with all his might. The gray chain immediately began to creak and groan, and it looked as if it could burst apart at any moment. But at this point, the gray draconic head had already completely taken shape, and it took up virtually the entire palace. Its skin was riddled with gray scales that were giving off a cold gleam, and two balls of gray fire lit up within its huge eye sockets as it cast its gaze toward Gong Shuji. A thunderous roar rang out as it opened its cavernous mouth to release a pillar of black light that struck Gong Shuji with tremendous force, resulting in an incredibly bright eruption of gray light that forced everyone to shield their eyes and look away. After the gray light faded, Han Li discovered that Gong Shuji had been sent flying into one of the collapsed walls of the palace. His body was virtually completely embedded into the wall, and his robes had been torn to shreds. His hair was completely disheveled, and it was clear that he had suffered extremely severe injuries. "That's all you've got? How frail. I don't even feel like playing around with you anymore," Moyu sighed as he made a hand seal, and another burst of blinding gray light emerged within the mouth of the gray draconic head. An alarmed look appeared on Gong Shuji's face as he hurriedly flew out of the wall as a streak of white light, and he didn't even have time to address his own injuries as a swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a small white flag and a yellow badge, which began to rapidly revolve around him to form a protective barrier. Right at this moment, a pained look suddenly appeared on Moyu's face, and he began to tremble uncontrollably, while his gray spirit domain also began to ripple violently. A dull thump rang out as the gray draconic head exploded into a vast expanse of gray light, following which the entire spirit domain also vanished in a flash. Gong Shuji was quite taken aback by this turn of events, but an ecstatic look then appeared on his face as he fled into the distance. Right at this moment, a streak of golden light flashed past, and a figure appeared in Gong Shuji's path in the blink of an eye. It was none other than Han Li, and radiant golden light erupted out of his body as he summoned his mantra-treasured axis, which immediately began to revolve rapidly. Countless golden ripples surged out of the axis before encompassing Gong Shuji's entire body, instantly stopping him cold in his tracks. Han Li then raised a hand to send an azure flying sword hurtling out of his sleeve, and it instantly swelled to over 100 feet in length, while thick arcs of golden lightning that were imbued with an incredibly destructive aura erupted over its surface. A cold gleam flashed through his eyes as he made a hand seal, and the giant azure sword abruptly appeared in front of Gong Shuji in a flash before crashing down with immense power. Gong Shuji was already aware of the fact that he was a member of the Reincarnation Palace, so if he were to get away, then there would be no end to Han Li's troubles. He had already determined that even high Zenith stage Jade Immortals weren't impervious to his time law powers. Prior to this, he had no chance of getting close to Gong Shuji, but the perfect opportunity had just presented itself. During the earlier battle, Zhu Wang had made sure to keep her distance, but she immediately swooped onto the scene upon seeing this. Things had progressed completely differently from what she had anticipated, but she was naturally not going to allow a mere mid-golden immortal cultivator to do as he pleased. As she flew through the air, she released a burst of white light out of her sleeve, and it contained a white rope immortal treasure that hurtled toward the giant azure sword. However, as soon as the white rope entered the golden ripples, it was immediately slowed down to the point that it looked as if it had fallen completely still. Zhu Wang had never seen Han Li's mantra-treasured axis before, so she was very much taken aback by this turn of events. A cold sneer appeared on Han Li's face as he abruptly expanded the golden ripples outward, and they instantly swelled in diameter by twofold to encompass Zhu Wang as well. As soon as she was caught within the golden ripples, Zhu Wang was also rooted to the spot, and the shocked look on her face had also completely stiffened. After trapping Zhu Wang, Han Li pointed a finger at his giant azure sword, and it began to glow radiantly as it crashed down upon Gong Shuji. An earth-shattering boom rang out as the giant azure sword was sent flying back, and it was trembling violently, while the spiritual light around it was flickering erratically. A surprised look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he hurriedly made a hand seal to stabilize his sword. He then turned to Gong Shuji to discover that an eggshell-like ball of white light had appeared around him. The ball of light was riddled with runes that were quite strange in appearance, and they weren't golden seal text, nor beveled silver text. The runes were arranged in a way that resembled the patterns on the back of a turtle's shell, and it was somehow able to withstand an all-out strike from Han Li's azure bamboo cloudswarm sword. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly as he made a hand seal, and the giant azure sword immediately lit up once again as it hurtled toward Gong Shuji. At the same time, two more identical azure bamboo cloudswarm swords emerged around him, and these two swords also swelled drastically in size before crashing down upon Gong Shuji with tremendous power. Three earth-shattering booms rang out in unison, but all their swords were sent flying back once again, while the ball of light only rippled slightly before falling still again. Han Li's expression darkened slightly upon seeing this. At this point, Moyu's complexion had already improved slightly, and the gray light around him was no longer flickering, but instead of re-entering the fray, he was observing Han Li and Gong Shuji from the sidelines with an intrigued look on his face. That's a myriad law bead. I didn't think that a mere immortal envoy would have so many fine treasures in his possession. It would almost be a pity to destroy this bead. Worm 3 was also watching Han Li and Gong Shuji, and it was unclear what she was thinking. As for Luo Chinghai and the others, they were all displaying different reactions to Han Li's abrupt interception. Han Li took a glance at Moyu and Worm 3, and his brows furrowed slightly as he made a hand seal in preparation to lash out with his azure bamboo cloudswarm swords again. Right at this moment, a burst of white light suddenly flashed over Gong Shuji's body, and a burst of tremendous law power fluctuations erupted out of the ball of white light to strike the golden ripples, which immediately began to flicker erratically, while the time law powers within them were thrown into a state of disarray. A surprised look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. With so many time Tao runes on his mantra-treasured axis, it was actually already far more powerful than his time spirit domain, albeit with a much more limited range, and this was the first time that someone had been able to disrupt it to this extent. As expected, a high zenith stage Jade Immortal was not to be underestimated. Despite this, Han Li remained completely unfazed as he made a rapid string of hand seals. His mantra-treasured axis began to revolve even faster, while the time Tao runes on its surface released a burst of radiant golden light, injecting bursts of time law powers into the surrounding golden ripples to stabilize them. However, before the disruption could be completely quelled, another burst of tremendous law power fluctuations erupted out of the ball of white light to strike the golden ripples, and this time, they began to flicker and tremble even more erratically than before. Han Li was doing everything in his power to stabilize the golden ripples, but the law power fluctuations surging out of the ball of white light were relentless, and each wave was more powerful than the previous one. Before long, the golden ripples were beginning to fall apart. Moyu's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he remarked, "Looks like even with mastery over one of the three paramount laws, it's too much to ask for a golden immortal to take down a jade immortal." He then proceeded to step forward, but Worm 3 stopped him as she interjected, "Don't force yourself, Moyu. Allow me." "Well, I'm certainly more than happy to sit back and watch," Moyu replied in a lackadaisical voice. Right at this moment, Luo Chinghai suddenly swept a sleeve through the air to summon a tall blue stone plaque that was riddled with blue patterns and giving off a peculiar aura. He then pressed both hands against the stone plaque, and everyone around him immediately followed suit. Even Nan Keming had flown over to his side, and his face was as pale as a sheet, but he pressed his palms against the stone plaque as well. A burst of translucent blue light with countless runes flashing within it erupted out of the stone plaque, then instantly enveloped all of them before flying away at an incredible speed, vanishing into the distance in the blink of an eye. The Blaze Dragon Dao Lord's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and he immediately opened his mouth to release several balls of crimson light, which encompassed his entire body, before also carrying him away into the distance in a flash. Taoist Hu Yan and Yun Nai were also struck by the urge to retreat upon seeing this, but they were hesitant to leave Han Li behind. "Get out of here, fellow Taoist Hu Yan. I did that gray immortal a favor by bringing him out of that underground palace, so he has no reason to target me. There's no telling what could happen from here, and the longer you stay, the more danger you'll be in," Han Li urged through voice transmission. Taoist Hu Yan and Yun Nai exchanged a hesitant glance with one another upon hearing this. Right at this moment, Moyu suddenly began to approach the two of them as he complained, "Why are all of you so scared of me? I'm a good person." His words of reassurance achieved the completely opposite effect, and Taoist Hu Yan and Yun Nai immediately flew away in the distance at the sight of the approaching Moyu. "How sad. I'm the savior here, yet I'm being treated like a villain." Moyu sighed with a shake of his head, and he made no attempt to pursue Taoist Hu Yan and Yun Nai as he turned his gaze back to Han Li. Right at this moment, Worm 3 abruptly appeared on the edge of the golden ripples, then raised both hands to release two streaks of yellow light, within which were a pair of long yellow needles. The pair of needles were giving off formidable earth law power fluctuations as they shot forth toward Gong Shuji, but they were also immediately stopped cold in their tracks upon flying into the golden ripples. "What are you doing, fellow Taoist Li?" Worm 3 asked as she turned to Han Li with furrowed brows. Han Li could only give a wry smile in response. Prior to mastering the laws of time, the golden ripples released by his mantra-treasured axis hadn't been all that formidable, and he had been able to control them back then so that they didn't slow down his allies in their attacks. However, now that he had reached the golden immortal stage and made significant strides in his mastery over the laws of time, his mantra-treasured axis had become countless times more powerful, but it had also become unwieldy and uncontrollable. Worm 3 seemed to have realized what the problem was upon seeing Han Li's expression, and her brows furrowed even tighter. If Han Li couldn't control these golden ripples, then there was no way for her to help him. Han Li took a deep breath as he summoned his time spirit domain to help him stabilize the golden ripples, but his efforts were proving to be largely futile. The golden ripples were becoming thinner and thinner, and at this rate, they weren't going to last much longer. The restrictive effect that the mantra-treasured axis had on Zhu Weiying was also significantly diminished, and a burst of law power fluctuations erupted out of her body, as well to fight back against the golden ripples. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he quickly made a hand seal, upon which the area encompassed within the golden ripples instantly shrank down to a radius of no more than 1,000 feet, thereby releasing Zhu Weiying. Zhu Weiying was ecstatic to have been freed, but she then took a fearful glance at Han Li and Worm 3 before immediately fleeing the scene, making no further attempt to assist Gong Shuji. A cold look appeared on Worm 3's face upon seeing this, and she immediately pointed a finger in Zhu Weiying's direction. At this point, her pair of yellow needles had also been freed, and they immediately shot forth toward Zhu Weiying at an incredible speed. As for Zhu Weiying, her speed was hampered by Han Li's time spirit domain, so the yellow needles were able to catch up to her in an instant. Immediately thereafter, countless yellow runes surged out of the pair of needles, forming a pair of large yellow nets that surrounded Zhu Weiying from all directions. Both nets were giving off tremendous law power fluctuations, and they quickly ensnared Zhu Weiying before shrinking down to form a yellow ball in the blink of an eye. A pleased look appeared in Worm 3's eyes upon seeing this, following which she turned her gaze back to Han Li with a contemplative expression. In terms of overall power, Zhu Wang wasn't only slightly inferior to her, so it shouldn't have been anywhere near this easy for Worm 3 to capture her. Yet here in this time spirit domain, Zhu Wang had been caught in an instant. However, right at this moment, the yellow ball began to bulge violently, swelling to several times its original size, and many small holes began to appear on its surface. Beams of radiant white light were bursting through these holes, and they erupted forth in all directions before converging to a single spot to reform Zhu Wang's body. However, in the wake of that brief ordeal, her face was looking a little pale, and as soon as she broke free from the yellow ball, she immediately continued to flee the scene even faster than before, reaching the edge of Han Li's time spirit domain in the blink of an eye. Worm 3's expression darkened slightly as she gave a cold harumph, and a burst of dark red light instantly erupted out of her body before expanding outward rapidly to form a dark red spirit domain in the blink of an eye, encompassing the fleeing Zhu Wang within. Countless bursts of dark red light were surging throughout the spirit domain, significantly slowing down the streak of white light around Zhu Wang, while also constantly whittling away at it. Right at this moment, the Worm 3's dark red spirit domain and Han Li's golden spirit domain suddenly overlapped with one another, and both spirit domains abruptly lit up significantly, as if they were resonating with one another. The two spirit domains then began to buzz and tremble, and a series of golden flowers appeared in the sky before drifting down from above. Not only had Han Li's spirit domain brightened significantly, the same had happened to his golden ripples as well, and they were instantly stabilized, trapping Gong Shuji firmly within once again. With both the time spirit domain and the dark red spirit domain becoming several times brighter, Zhu Wang was also stopped cold in her tracks, unable to move any further. Both Han Li and Worm 3 exchanged a bewildered glance upon seeing this, while a hint of surprise appeared in Moyu's eyes as well. Han Li and Worm 3 had no idea what was happening here, but both of them knew that this wasn't the time to ponder such matters, so they immediately returned their attention to the battle at hand. Worm 3 made a hand seal, and the yellow ball exploded, transforming into a pair of long, yellow needles once again. Radiant yellow light erupted out of the pair of needles, and they vanished without a trace, then appeared beside Zhu Wang an instant later before sweeping directly through her. Her body was instantly severed into several pieces, and blood was sent splattering in all directions. Han Li paid no heed to what was happening on that end, as he continued to stare intently at Gong Shuji. Trapped inside Worm 3's dark red spirit domain, the ball of white light around Gong Shuji had dimmed significantly, and this was naturally quite an encouraging sight for Han Li, as a burst of radiant purplish-golden light erupted out of his body. At the same time, several balls of light of different colors flew out of his body as well, then transformed into a series of different true spirit projections. These projections revolved around Han Li momentarily before fusing back into his body, and he immediately began to swell drastically in stature. A layer of purplish-golden scales appeared over his body, and in the blink of an eye, he had transformed into a purplish-golden giant that was over 1,000 feet tall. The muscles on his shoulders and beneath his ribs squirmed in a rather grotesque fashion, following which 2 heads and 4 arms sprang out of his body. Han Li knew that it was time to pull out all the stops, and he had unleashed his holy nirvana physique. The purplish-golden giant's entire body was riddled with countless golden and silver spirit patterns, and 36 specks of starlight had appeared on its lower abdomen. The combination of the radiant starlight and the dazzling purplish-golden light emanating from the giant's body made this form appear far more formidable than in the past. Blue light flashed within Han Li's eyes as he let loose a low roar, and an incredibly formidable aura erupted out of his body, causing the surrounding space to tremble violently and sending rings of visible ripples surging outward in all directions. A peculiar look flashed through Worm Three's eyes at the sight of Han Li's holy nirvana physique, and Moyu was also quite taken aback by the sight of this transformation. Han Li made a grabbing motion with all 6 of his hands, and the 3 azure bamboo cloud swarm swords flew into his grasp. He then opened his mouth to release 3 translucent golden threads, which vanished into the 3 giant swords in a flash. The azure light radiating from the 3 swords instantly brightened by severalfold, as did the arcs of golden lightning flashing over them, and they transformed into countless golden lightning runes that swirled around the 3 swords. The surrounding space shuddered once again in the face of the 3 swords' collective aura, while Han Li's heavy water true axis appeared in one of 3 vacant hands. As for the final 2 hands, a pair of purplish golden weapons, namely a giant axe and a massive hammer, had taken shape within them. These 2 weapons had been formed purely by spiritual power, but they were also giving off incredibly formidable auras. Han Li took a step forward, and he abruptly vanished from the spot, then reappeared in front of the ball of white light an instant later before swinging all 6 of his weapons down upon it. The 3 azure bamboo cloud swarm swords, the heavy water true axis, and the 2 purplish golden weapons struck the ball of white light with an earth-shattering boom, causing it to tremble violently, while the part that had been struck caved in significantly. However, the ball of light was incredibly resilient, and not only was it able to hold itself intact, it was able to repel all of Han Li's weapons. However, after withstanding those attacks, the ball of white light had dimmed slightly. A hint of elation flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, and he immediately continued his assault, swinging his weapons down in a relentless barrage. The sound of Han Li's weapons pounding down onto the ball of white light resembled that of countless thunderclaps ringing out at once, releasing a burst of terrifying power that caused the nearby space to warp violently. Moyu and Worm 3 were both astonished to see this. Before long, the ball of white light was completely inundated by the barrage of furious attacks, and it resembled a tiny raft that was swaying unsteadily on a turbulent sea. The light that was emanating from it was becoming dimmer and dimmer, and before long, only a thin layer of it remained. Right at this moment, Han Li let loose a thunderous roar as blinding purplish golden light erupted out of his body. His 6 arms became significantly thicker and stronger, while the 6 weapons in his hands also lit up significantly as they crashed down upon the ball of white light one final time. A loud crack rang out as the ball of light was finally shattered into countless specks of white light, and Gong Shuji was revealed underneath with his hair completely disheveled. Blood was also pouring out of all of his orifices, seemingly from the impact of all of Han Li's prior attacks, and there was an astonished look on his face. A white bead was hanging in front of his chest, and it quickly shattered, just like the ball of white light. Han Li's 6 weapons were stopped in their tracks for a brief moment before continuing to crash down upon Gong Shuji, and a dull thump rang out as he was smashed into a pile of mincemeat. A relieved look flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, but right at this moment, a nascent soul that was as fair and translucent as jade flew out Gong Shuji's remains. Around the nascent soul were several dozen wisps of white flames, which formed the shape of a lotus flower that encompassed the nascent soul within it. Each wisp of these white flames had a translucent law thread within it, but these law threads were slowly shrinking, as if they were burning away. A burst of incredibly formidable law powers erupted out of the white flames to force the golden ripples away, following which the white nascent soul vanished into thin air. An alarmed look appeared in Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, but he didn't panic, and his law destruction eye instantly appeared on his glabella. The eye was flashing with a cold black gleam as it scoured the surrounding area. At the same time, a translucent spiritual sense chain shot out of his glabella as well, then also vanished into thin air in a flash. This spiritual sense chain was completely different from before. Not only had it become over 2 times thicker than in the past, a series of silver runes were also swirling around it, giving off a burst of law power fluctuations. Immediately thereafter, a dull thump rang out, and the translucent chain emerged over 10,000 feet away, with the white nascent soul ensnared within it. The nascent soul was flailing its little arms with all its might, fanning the white flames around it to incinerate the translucent chain, but the latter remained as resilient as an immovable mountain. "You're not getting away," Han Li declared with a cold sneer on his face as he swept a sleeve through the air, releasing an azure bamboo cloud swarm sword that instantly transformed into a thin azure and golden thread. A peerlessly sharp aura was surging out of the thin thread, causing the nearby space to tremble and sway. The thin thread appeared in front of the white nascent soul in the blink of an eye, then pierced straight into its glabella, passing through with some difficulty. With a hole punched into the nascent soul's glabella, the white flames around it instantly subsided, and Gong Shuji's consciousness completely faded, leaving only a pure nascent soul crystal behind. Only then did Han Li heave a sigh of relief as he quickly reverted back to his human form. His complexion had paled significantly, and he quickly withdrew his time spirit domain and his mantra treasured axis as well. The combination of his spirit domain, mantra treasured axis, and holy nirvana physique had been extremely taxing to unleash all at once, and at this point, his immortal spiritual power had already been completely exhausted. He raised a hand to make a beckoning motion, and the golden and azure sword thread flew back into his body with something wrapped within it, while the other 2 azure bamboo cloud swarm swords and the heavy water true axis were also stowed away. He then flipped a hand over to produce a pair of pills that he promptly devoured, and only then did his complexion improve slightly. With Han Li's time spirit domain withdrawn, Worm 3's dark red spirit domain instantly returned to normal, and she took a long glance at Han Li before withdrawing her spirit domain as well. After taking a moment to recover, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a burst of azure that swept up Gong Shuji's storage bracelet, a pair of immortal treasures, and that white nascent soul. "Well done, kid. To think that a mere golden immortal like yourself was able to slay a high zenith cultivator. If word of this were to escape, then the entire Immortal Realm would be in awe. The paramount laws are truly not to be underestimated," Moyu praised with a smile as he flew over to Han Li's side. However, Han Li knew that he couldn't take full credit for killing Gong Shuji. If it weren't for the fact that his spirit domain had resonated with Worm 3's, thereby significantly enhancing its power, there was no way it would have been able to contain Gong Shuji. With that in mind, the thought of the 2 Dawnfall sect golden immortals sprang into his mind. Their yin and yang law powers had enhanced one another in much the same way as the spirit domain resonance that had just taken place. Han Li cast his gaze toward Moyu as he asked, "Who exactly are you? Should I be calling you the boundless Taoist right now, or Gray Immortal Moyu?" "I am Gray Immortal Moyu, not the boundless Taoist," Moyu replied with a smile. Han Li didn't seem all that surprised to hear this, and he asked, "In that case, how much of what you told me about the boundless Taoist and the infernal frost immortal lord is actually true?" "I concealed my identity so that you would be willing to take me with you out of the Moonlight Palace, but everything else I told you is all true. The boundless Taoist and the infernal frost immortal lord are one and the same. In fact, she's here right now," Moyu said as he cast his gaze toward a certain direction. Han Li and Worm 3 were both rather taken aback to hear this, and they turned to the same direction. "Why are you not showing yourself?" Moyu asked in a gentle voice. A burst of spatial fluctuations emerged in that direction, and to Han Li's surprise, Lu Yuqing appeared before his eyes. However, her disposition had undergone a complete change, and she was giving a peerlessly cold and sharp aura, as if she were the personification of a mighty sword. "We finally meet again after so many years apart," Mo Yu said as he looked deep into Lu Yuqing's eyes, then approached her before grabbing onto her hands. Lu Yuqing's cold facade instantly crumbled, and a faint blush appeared on her face as she complained, "What are you doing? There are people watching." That decision of mine kept us apart for so many years, and it almost permanently separated us. Now that we've been reunited, I'm never going to let go of you again, Mo Yu said in a firm voice. Lu Yuqing briefly put up a half-hearted struggle, then gave up and allowed Mo Yu to do as he pleased. Han Li and Worm 3 were feeling a little awkward, and both of them looked away. At the same time, the image of Nangong Wan sprang into Han Li's mind, and he couldn't help but heave a forlorn internal sigh. All of a sudden, a pained yelp snapped Han Li out of his train of thought. Han Li turned in that direction to find Mo Yu with his head cocked to the side, and there was a pained look on his face, while his ear was plucked upward by Lu Yuqing. Worm 3 was also rather flabbergasted to see this. "I told you to stop. You think you can just ignore what I say now?" Lu Yuqing yelled in an angry voice, presenting a stark contrast to the shy display that she had put on just a moment ago. "Ow, ow, you're going to tear it off. I'm sorry, I apologize, please," Mo Yu hurriedly implored in an agonized voice. "You always apologize, but when have you ever actually changed? If it wasn't for you, neither of us would have ended up like this." Lu Yuqing raised her hand further as she spoke, and Mo Yu's head was also plucked up a bit further as a result. "I already apologized, didn't I? Please forgive me, there are people watching," Mo Yu implored as he put on a fawning smile. Lu Yuqing took a glance at Han Li and Worm 3, then gave a cold harumph as she let go of Mo Yu's ear. Mo Yu hurriedly clasped a hand over his ear while giving Lu Yuqing a sycophantic smile, looking much like a puppy eagerly trying to suck up to its owner. "Why did you let those people from the vast Flow Palace get away? If the Heavenly Court learns of what happened here, you know what the outcome is going to be," Lu Yuqing asked with furrowed brows. "Those are just small fry, it doesn't matter whether they get away or not. Besides, even if I had killed them, there's still no way that the news of our resurrection could be kept secret," Mo Yu replied. Lu Yuqing raised an eyebrow upon hearing this, and before she could respond, Mo Yu abruptly turned and cast his gaze toward Han Li and Worm 3 as he declared, "It's all thanks to you two that we were able to finally reunite with each other. I'm no saint or gentleman, but I've always paid sure to repay those who have been kind to me, so if you have any requests, feel free to state them, and we'll do our best to fulfill those requests." Lu Yuqing continued to glower at Mo Yu for a moment, then also turned to Han Li as she said, "Thank you for protecting me all this time, fellow Taoist Han. It was only thanks to your help that I was able to recover my memories. If I don't repay this favor, then my Tao heart will be inhibited, so please do tell us how we can make it up to you." "Fellow Taoist Han, weren't those people calling you fellow Taoist Li earlier? What is your actual name?" Mo Yu asked. "A name is nothing more than a title. You can just call me Li Feiyu," Han Li replied. "Even after all we've been through together, you're still hiding your name. Aren't you being a little too cautious?" Mo Yu grumbled in a disgruntled voice. Worm 3 was clearly also curious to hear Han Li's real name, but she didn't say anything. Han Li didn't want to dwell on this topic any longer, so he turned to Lu Yuqing as he said, "In that case, I'm happy to oblige. Even though I've attained a spirit domain, I'm still not able to completely control it. Both of you are far more experienced with spirit domains than I am, so I'd like you to teach me how to use my spirit domain." Moyu and Lu Yuking exchanged a glance with one another upon hearing this, following which the former said, "Due to the disparities in the law powers mastered by each person, the way that a spirit domain is used will also differ from person to person, and the only way to truly master one's spirit domain is through experimentation. Having said that, experiences and insights from others may prove to be useful. These are the insights that I've gleaned from all my years experimenting with my spirit domain. You can have them for reference purposes." Moyu flicked a finger through the air as he spoke, sending a gray jade slip flying toward Han Li. Han Li caught the jade slip, then briefly inspected its contents with his spiritual sense, following which a faint smile appeared on his face. "You have my thanks." "What would you like, Worm 3? Moyu asked as he turned to Worm 3. A contemplative look appeared in Worm 3's eyes, and she didn't immediately respond. Only after a brief silence did she reply, "I came here to save you on someone else's orders, so there's no need to compensate me. Having said that, during my time in the Reincarnation Palace, I've always heard that you're an extremely knowledgeable and experienced person, so I would like to ask you a question." "Go ahead," Moyu prompted with a slight nod. "Just now, my spirit domain resonated with fellow Taoist Lees, and as a result, both of our spirit domains were significantly enhanced. Do you know why that happened?" Worm 3 asked. "Throughout the entire Immortal Realm, the vast majority of golden immortals have mastered at least one type of law powers. For those who haven't mastered any law powers, withstanding the 3 decays is far too difficult, and progressing to the golden immortal stage is next to impossible for them. Generally speaking, the more advanced one's mastery over their law powers, the more powerful their spirit domain will be. However, as the most fundamental powers of this realm, law powers are extremely profound, and there will sometimes be certain connections between certain law powers. When some compatible law powers are used alongside one another, they'll be able to significantly enhance each other," Moyu explained. "So you're saying that some laws can be used in combination with one another?" Han Li asked. "That's right, but it's a very rare occurrence, and not all law powers are compatible with one another. Only the law powers that are a good fit with each other have a chance of achieving resonance, such as the laws of yin and yang, the laws of wind and fire. You get the idea," Moyu replied. "I see. In that case, my laws of time had to have somehow combined with fellow Taoist Worm 3's law powers just now, and that resulted in an elevation of both of our law powers," Han Li mused. "According to my knowledge, it's very difficult to combine law powers like this, and even for those who possess theoretically compatible law powers, it still takes extensive practice to facilitate resonance of law powers like this. Up to this point, fellow Taoist Li have only met several times, and we've never practiced combining our law powers in the past, so how did this just spontaneously happen all of a sudden?" Worm 3 asked. "As I mentioned, all law powers are extremely profound, and I dare say even a Tao Lord doesn't have full understanding over the laws that they've mastered. As for spontaneous law resonance, this is not something that hasn't happened before, so there's no need to be alarmed. If I'm not mistaken, you're cultivating the laws of reincarnation, right? I must admit, it's extremely rare to see resonance take place between 2 of the 3 paramount laws," Moyu mused. Worm 3 didn't seem to be very convinced by this explanation, but she didn't say press any further on this subject. Meanwhile, Han Li turned to Worm 3 with a hint of surprise in his eyes. Prior to this, he hadn't been able to identify what law powers Worm 3 had been using, but Moyu had just answered that question for him. "Both of your requests have been fulfilled now. The 2 of us have only just returned to this realm, and we still have many things to do, so this is where we'll part ways. I'll send the 2 of you out of the infernal frost immortal manor soon. In the meantime—" "Please wait here for a moment," Lu Yuking said, then swept a hand through the air. Before Han Li and Worm 3 had a chance to respond, A burst of azure light swept up both her and Moyu before flying away into the distance, vanishing out of sight in a flash. Han Li looked on at the departing duo with a contemplative look in his eyes. Even though he had been skeptical about some of the things that the soul fragment had told him, never could he have imagined that he would be a gray immortal. As for Lu Yuqing, he certainly would have never guessed that she was the reincarnation of the boundless Taoist and the true infernal frost immortal lord. However, what came as the biggest surprise to him was that Moyu and the infernal frost immortal lord seemed to have become Tao partners countless years ago. Fate was truly a fickle and whimsical mistress at times. As these thoughts were flashing through his mind, he turned to take a glance at Worm 3, and he couldn't see her expression through her mask, but it seemed that she was in deep thought. He directed his gaze away from her, then descended onto the collapsed palace down below before releasing his spiritual sense. Before long, an elated look appeared on his face as he swept a sleeve through the air to release several streaks of azure light in all directions, and the streaks of light quickly carried some objects back to him, namely a few pieces of the shattered golden roof and 2 destroyed golden puppets. The roof had been constructed out of some type of golden material, with a series of spirit patterns engraved onto its surface, and these roof fragments were giving off a type of special aura that was rather similar to that of his integrated 5 Extremes mountain. The golden roof had shown itself to be extremely effective in warding off pill tribulations earlier, and even though it had been shattered, these fragments still retained their spiritual nature, so they were still very useful to him. As for the 2 puppets, he was quite interested in them as well. Meanwhile, Worm 3 remained still on the spot, displaying no intention to scour the palace to spoils. Han Li quickly stowed these things away, yet right as he was about to keep searching, a thick pillar of golden light suddenly descended out of the sky without any warning, encompassing both of them in the blink of an eye. Han Li felt the air constrict around him, and there was tremendous pressure surging out of the golden light, instantly rendering him completely immobilized. Countless runes were surging incessantly throughout the golden light, then converged toward Han Li's duo to form a pair of golden formations. Both of them felt the entirety of their fields of view being completely filled with golden radiance, following which they abruptly vanished from within the pillar of golden light. Elsewhere in the infernal frost immortal manor, there stood a relatively well-preserved 3-story pagoda in a garden that was overgrown with weeds. 2 people were standing on the top floor of the pagoda, and both of them were looking into the distance. They were none other than Moyu and Lu Yuqing, and the former had his arms wrapped around the latter as he gently stroked her shoulder. "You're a lot more petite than before. I wasn't able to embrace you like this in the past," Moyu chuckled. "Oh, it sounds like you like this body of mine better than my previous one," Lu Yun remarked as she raised an eyebrow. Moyu's expression instantly stiffened upon seeing this, and cold sweat began to bead up on his forehead as he hurriedly replied, "Your appearance isn't important. What's important to me is what's on the inside. I can't be bothered beating you anymore. It's a waste of my energy," Lu Yun scoffed. "You're completely right. My skin is really thick, so it doesn't really hurt me, but if you hurt your hand while beating me, then I could never forgive myself," Moyu said with a wide grin. "Do you really not blame me for what I did all those years ago?" Lu Yun asked as she stepped out of Moyu's embrace and made her way over to the railing in front of her. "The first few centuries after you sealed me away, I was indeed quite angry and confused, and after that, I even came to resent you a little. However, as more time passed, I simply missed you and couldn't work up the desire to resent you any longer," Moyu replied. "I didn't think that the reincarnation palace would react so aggressively, to the point that they attacked my infernal frost immortal manor. The situation completely spiraled out of control from there, and the heavenly court ended up becoming the main beneficiary," Lu Yun sighed. It's all right, it's all in the past. Now that we've returned to the northern glacial immortal region, it's time that we settled the score with the heavenly court, Moyu said as he reached out to stroke Lu Yun's shoulder once again. A loud slap rang out as the back of the hand was dealt a heavy blow. Don't go touching me as you please when there are other people watching. Lu Yun scolded with her back facing Moyu, but there was a faint smile playing on her lips. Ali. In the sky above a vast, nameless ocean, countless streaks of light suddenly erupted out thin air, then converged to form a rectangular door of light that was several dozen feet tall and giving off bursts of formidable spatial fluctuations. The radiant golden light within the door of light flashed momentarily, following which a pillar of golden light erupted out from within. A pair of figures were sent flying out of the door of light alongside the golden pillar, following which the door of light quickly faded away. The two figures were none other than Worm 3 and Han Li, both of whom had already adopted their disguises once again. Not long after they parted ways with Moyu and Lu Yun, they were teleported out of the infernal frost immortal manor. After taking a moment to steady himself, Han Li looked around with a slightly lost expression as he asked, "Do you know where we are right now, fellow Taoist Worm 3? Worm 3 flipped a hand over to produce a jade slip that contained a map, and after inspecting the map for a moment to ascertain their location, she replied, "We're still in the Black Wind Sea right now, but we're very far away from Red Moon Island." "Would I be able to have a look at that map?" Han Li asked. "It's not worth much anyway, so you can have it. In any case, I most likely won't be coming back to the Black Wind Sea ever again," Worm 3 said as she casually tossed the jade slip at Han Li. Han Li caught the jade slip, then cupped her fist toward her in a grateful salute. "Do you have any plans from here, fellow Taoist Han?" Worm 3 asked. "I still have some private matters to take care of in the Black Wind Sea. After that, I'll probably be leaving the Black Wind Sea as well," Han Li replied. "Just leaving the Black Wind Sea most likely isn't going to be enough. My advice to you is that you should leave the northern glacial immortal region altogether," Worm 3 said. "That was my intention further down the line. Once news of Xiao Jinhin and Gong Shuji's demise reached the heavenly court, the entire northern glacial immortal realm is most likely going to undergo an enormous change. Those of us who have entered the infernal frost immortal manor will surely be targeted by the heavenly court, and that's not to mention that I'm already a wanted fugitive of the immortal palace," Han Li mused. Even though he had managed to slay Gong Shuji and the immortal, there had been a huge element of luck in that battle. If he were to unleash all of his most powerful abilities at once, then he really did possess the power required to slay a high zenith stage Jade Immortal. But the problem was that his limited immortal spiritual power reserves meant that he wouldn't be able to maintain this peak form for very long. If it weren't for the fact that Gong Shuji had already been significantly worn down by Moyu and the resonance that had taken place between his and Worm 3's spirit domains, there was no way that he would have been able to secure that victory. He was definitely going to be hunted by heavenly court immortal envoys of comparable cultivation base from this point onward, and the thought of that filled him with the burning desire to attain more power. Given the turmoil that was inevitably going to sweep through the northern glacial immortal region, this was clearly not a place where he could continue to cultivate in peace. With your unfathomable powers, your future should be a bright one with limitless potential, but in reality, it's one that's fraught with peril, and even the slightest misstep could lead to your demise, Worm 3 suddenly said. Han Li's expression remained unchanged as he replied, "If you have something to say, then say it. There's no need to try and scare me." "I'm not trying to scare you, fellow Taoist Han. I'm merely stating the facts. The fact that you've cultivated both the spirit refinement technique and the laws of time means that your days are most likely numbered," Worm 3 said. What do you mean by that? Hanley asked as his brows furrowed slightly. There are some circumstances involved that I can't explain to you right now, but what I can tell you is that the best way for you to weather this storm is to become a true core member of our reincarnation palace. I can submit a recommendation for you if you'd like. Once you have the protection of the reincarnation palace, it won't be so easy for the heavenly court to target you, Worm 3 explained. Was I not a core member before? Hanley asked. Reincarnation disciples are supposed to be core members of our reincarnation palace, but due to the circumstances, your instatement as a reincarnation disciple was quite rushed, so none of the higher-ups of our reincarnation palace are aware of your existence, Worm 3 replied. I'm not completely opposed to the idea, but does the reincarnation palace really have the power to oppose the heavenly court? Hanley asked. Compared with the heavenly court, we don't have any major subsidiary powers on the surface, such as the immortal palaces. However, underground organizations like the Ubiquitous Pavilion and the Transient Guild are far more covert, and there are too many such organizations to count littered throughout the entire Immortal Realm. I'm sure you're well aware of the cumulative power of such organizations, Worm 3 said. Hanley fell into deep thought upon hearing this. The Transient Guild was already an extremely powerful organization on its own, so if it really was just one of the countless subsidiary powers of the Reincarnation Palace, then the Reincarnation Palace would truly be a monolith of unimaginable proportions. Even so, Hanley still didn't immediately jump to a decision. I need some time to think about this. Worm 3 had already anticipated this response, and she replied, That's fine. I'm sure you'll decide to join us one day. In any case, it's true that I can't stay in the northern glacial immortal region any longer. Can you suggest any good ways for me to leave this immortal region? Hanley asked. There are different ways to travel between immortal regions, but the most common method is to use interregion gates. Back when the northern glacial immortal realm was under the infernal frost immortal lord's command, there had been a total of 8 interregion gates, but most of them have been destroyed since then. And at this point, there's only a single one left. It's under the control of the Northern Glacial Immortal Palace, and it's situated in the Extreme Star Palace. Only one. Doesn't that mean that I'll have no choice but to go through the Northern Glacial Immortal Palace if I want to travel to other immortal regions? Hanley asked as his brows furrowed slightly. This is the only official route, and of course, it's inaccessible to our Reincarnation Palace, so we've created another avenue through which one can reach the nearest Black Mountain Immortal region, but it's far more time and energy consuming than traveling through an interregion gate, Worm 3 replied. How so? Hanley asked. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but aside from a very small number of immortal regions that directly neighbor one another, most of them are separated by vast primordial lands. These primordial lands vary in size, but all of them are extremely perilous. Through several million years of exploration, our Reincarnation Palace was able to establish a relatively safe route to the Black Mountain Immortal region, Worm 3 explained. Why didn't the Reincarnation Palace just construct an interregion gate of its own? Wouldn't that be much safer and more convenient? Hanley asked. An interregion gate is not just an ordinary super long-distance teleportation formation, fellow Taoist Han. The entire teleportation process requires the participation of cultivators who are at or above the golden immortal stage and are adept at using spatial powers. On top of that, an astronomical amount of resources is required to construct the gate, so it's not just something that anyone can afford to construct, Worm 3 explained. Perhaps that would be a major obstacle for other powers, but surely the Reincarnation Palace possesses more than sufficient wealth to accomplish such a feat, Hanley mused. You're right. Given the wealth that our Reincarnation Palace possesses, we could construct even 3 or 4 interregion gates in this immortal region with no problems. However, the operation of an interregion gate involves the usage of spatial law powers, and those law power fluctuations are impossible to conceal. Unless we construct the interregion gates but never use them, they'll eventually all be taken over by the heavenly court, Worm 3 explained. I see. In that case, can I access the established route that you just mentioned? Han Li asked. As a reincarnation disciple, you have the right to use the route, Worm 3 replied with a nod, then flipped a hand over to produce a white jade badge that she tossed at Han Li. You can find all of the information pertaining to the route in this jade badge, Worm 3 said. Why didn't you use this jade badge as leverage to force me to become a core member of the Reincarnation Palace? Han Li asked as he caught the jade badge. There's no need for me to do that. I'm sure you'll willingly make the decision yourself in the near future. Oh, and here's the 5th level of the spirit refinement technique that I promised you earlier, Worm 3 said, then flipped her hand over once again to produce another jade slip that she tossed at Han Li. Han Li caught the black jade slip, then briefly inspected its contents before stowing it away into his storage bracelet. I can see that you're a woman of your word, fellow Taoist Worm 3. You have my thanks, Han Li said as he cupped his fist in a grateful salute. I still have some other matters to attend to in the northern glacial immortal region, so this is where we'll have to part ways, Worm 3 said, then immediately turned to depart. However, she then suddenly turned around again as she continued. Your cautious nature really reminds me of someone else that I know. If you ever get to meet him someday, I'm sure the two of you would really get along. After that, she flew away as a streak of light, quickly vanishing into the distance. Han Li could only look on at Worm 3's departing figure with a wry smile. He took some time to closely examine the map of the Black Wind Sea, and he discovered that not only was he currently very far away from Red Moon Island, he wasn't particularly close to any of the islands on the map. Moments later, he stowed the map away, then set off in the direction of Dark Vale Island as a streak of azure light. The wind blowing over the sea was carrying with it a slightly rank and salty smell, and after flying for tens of thousands of kilometers, Han Li removed the mask on his face and reverted back to his original appearance. He then gently exhaled as he slowed down in his flight, inspecting his surroundings as he flew along at a leisurely pace, and it was a rare moment of serenity for him. Even though the trip into the Infernal Frost Immortal Manor had been fraught with peril, his luck had been quite exceptional, and not only was he able to ultimately survive the ordeal completely unscathed, he had reaped many rewards to boot. His cultivation base had reached the mid-golden immortal stage, he had managed to manifest a large number of time law threads, and he had also attained a spirit domain. On top of that, his entire set of azure bamboo cloudswarm swords had undergone an incredible evolution, and even Jin Tong and his essence Fire Raven had both become significantly more powerful than before. Additionally, he also had the storage tools of Zhao Jinhen, Feng Tiandu, and Gong Shuji, and he was very much looking forward to going through the contents of those storage tools. Close to an hour later, a 3-colored island that was around 10 to 15 kilometers in size appeared in Han Li's field of view down below. He immediately swept his spiritual sense over the island to find that it was completely devoid of human habitation, so he decided that this would be a good place to make a stop at. As he descended toward the island, he was able to catch a clearer glimpse of it. The eastern part of the island was filled with lush greenery, giving it a vibrant green color when viewed from afar, and the cries of apes and deers were ringing out incessantly from within. The central area of the island was slightly barren, with sections of yellow earth exposed, while the western side of the island was riddled with steep cliffs and mountain faces. As soon as Han Li descended onto the island, a burst of loud rustling instantly rang out from within the dense forest, and a flock of seabirds rose up from the greenery, before flying away from the island. He found a patch of empty ground in the eastern part of the island, where the sunlight filtered through the trees, and he sat down there with his legs crossed. Immediately thereafter, a speck of golden light emerged from his body, then quickly expanded to form a spherical light barrier that encompassed the entire island. He then flipped a hand over to produce a trio of storage bracelets, while a small white flag and a yellow badge also appeared on his lap. The flag bore the image of a sea of clouds with both beveled silver text and golden seal text runes embroidered within them, while the words "Cloud Talisman" were inscribed onto the shaft of the flag, and that was presumably the name of the treasure. This was a treasure of quite a high caliber, but there were no restrictions placed upon it, and Han Li was able to use it as he pleased after a brief stint of refinement. He injected his immortal spiritual power into the flag, and it immediately swelled drastically in size, forming a huge flag that was close to 20 feet tall. As he waved the flag through the air, a vast expanse of white mist that resembled a sea of clouds surged out from within, inundating the entire island in the blink of an eye. All of the remaining birds and beasts on the island instantly erupted into a panicked frenzy with the sudden descent of this cloud of mist. Fortunately for them, Han Li was only testing out what the flag could do, and he hadn't unleashed any of its abilities, so none of the living creatures on the island were harmed. He discovered that this flag seemed to actually be an offensive treasure, but in a fit of panic, Gong Shuji had used it as a protective treasure earlier, so its true power was never revealed. Having said that, the fact that an early high zenith cultivator had summoned it in such a perilous situation to protect himself indicated that the flag had to have some brilliant abilities, ones that Han Li was eager to explore in the future. After stowing the flag away, he pulled out the yellow badge before conducting a close examination. The badge was enshrouded within a layer of yellow light, within which some extremely obscure runes were flashing incessantly, and at the center of the badge was inscribed the words "Immortal Envoy" in golden seal text. Han Li extended his spiritual sense toward the badge, but as soon as his spiritual sense came into contact with it, it immediately released a burst of yellow light that kept his spiritual sense at bay. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he attempted to channel his immortal spiritual power into the yellow badge as well. All of a sudden, a string of runes abruptly erupted out of the badge before racing up into the heavens. Han Li was greatly startled by this, and he immediately summoned his mantra Treasured Axis, which released a wave of golden ripples that instantly encompassed the entire surrounding area. The string of runes was only able to fly for about 1,000 feet before they were encompassed within the golden ripples, upon which they were instantly slowed down significantly, and Han Li made a grabbing motion with one hand to draw the runes back to himself. The string of runes was struggling in his hand as if they were living creatures, and as soon as he tightened his grip around them, they were immediately scattered into specks of yellow light that quickly faded away. Han Li presumed that these runes had been released by some type of concealed restriction in the badge, which would be activated as soon as someone outside of Gong Shuji tried to use the badge, and if those runes had been allowed to escape, then another immortal envoy from the heavenly court would most likely be on his trail soon. Han Li gently exhaled as he stared at the yellow badge with a hesitant look on his face. The badge had the potential to expose him, so his immediate thought was to destroy it right away. However, it was no ordinary object, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it would be somehow useful to him in the future, so it would be a real pity to have to destroy it. After some hesitation, Han Li decided against destroying the badge. Instead, he placed some thorough seals on it before stowing it away. After that, he picked up Zhao Jinhen's storage bracelet, and after briefly refining it, he released all of its contents, which took up the entire clearing that he was in. Following a brief examination, Han Li discovered that there were over 30 treasures among the items, the most powerful ones of which were a set of 2 ice-attribute swords and a small blue flag, both of which were acquired immortal treasures that were imbued with law powers. Aside from that, there were also several dozen vials of different pills, only a small number of which Han Li was able to identify, while the rest were completely unfamiliar to him. However, the medicinal auras emanating from all of these pills were far more formidable than the pills that he had regularly consumed to assist in his cultivation in the past. So it was clear that these were pills that were only fit for consumption for golden immortals. Having reigned supreme over the northern glacial immortal region for so many years, Luo Chinghai had accumulated a very impressive fortune, but all of it had now fallen into Han Li's hands. Han Li briefly split up these pills into different categories, then stowed all of them away as well with a sweep of his sleeve. His gaze then fell upon a white scroll that was around a foot tall, and he casually drew it into his own grasp before opening it. As the scroll was slowly unfurled, Han Li caught a glimpse of several large characters running vertically down the right side of the scroll, and the characters read, Huanan Pill Scripture. He hurriedly unrolled the entire scroll upon seeing this, then began to pore over its contents. A short while later, he slowly rolled the scroll back up again, and a faint smile had appeared on his face. There were only 5 pill recipes on the entire scroll, but all of them were for refining golden immortal stage pills, so they were perfect for Han Li. Furthermore, he could tell from the descriptions of the 5 pills that all of them were among the vials of pills that he had just stowed away. Hence, he had both the pill recipes and some samples in his possession, and he would be able to refine more of these pills any time that he pleased. Han Li took a deep breath to suppress his elation before opening another scroll, and this one was filled with no fewer than 5,000 tiny ancient characters. The characters had been inscribed in a very forceful fashion, to the point that the strokes had created deep indentations into the material of the scroll, and the text was giving off a cold and menacing aura. Just the mere sight of the scroll was enough to make Han Li feel as if he were standing in a bone-chilling snowstorm. This scroll contained the cultivation insights that Luo Chinghai had gleaned over the course of his entire life, pertaining to the laws of water. Han Li wasn't cultivating the laws of water, but the Black Sea heavy water tome being cultivated by his earthly deity avatar was a water attribute cultivation art, and he also regularly used heavy water himself, so he was quite familiar with concepts related to the laws of water. As such, he was able to determine that these insights were extremely valuable, and this scroll would be highly sought after among those cultivating the laws of water. After stowing the 2 scrolls away, Han Li turned his gaze to all of the spirit medicines and materials that littered the ground. A brief examination told him that all of these spirit medicines were very advanced in age, and they were most likely ingredients required to refine the golden immortal stage pills from earlier. As for the spirit materials, they were also all quite rare and precious, but most of them were ice attribute materials that weren't very useful for Han Li. Aside from those things, all that remained of Luo Chinghai's belongings was a small mountain of immortal origin stones, which were shimmering radiantly under the light of the sun. He gleefully stowed all of these items away, then immediately moved onto the storage bracelet that had once belonged to Feng Tiandu. A burst of azure light swept over the ground, and the entire clearing was once again filled with items of all descriptions, among which were 3 acquired immortal treasures, namely a black bone saber that was around 2 feet in length, an inky black rectangular inkstone, and a sheet of paper that had a jade-like quality to it. After unraveling all of the restrictions placed upon them, Han Li refined all 3 treasures to an elementary extent. On each side of the black bone saber was engraved a crescent-shaped indentation, out of which faint wisps of baleful chi were emanating incessantly. In contrast with the bone saber, the rectangular inkstone appeared completely unremarkable in appearance. There was nothing inscribed upon it, and its only noteworthy feature was that its surface was riddled with irregular cracks. However, as soon as Han Li injected his immortal spiritual power into the inkstone, scorching black flames instantly surged out of those cracks. As for the sheet of jade-like paper, a beastly lion-like head was engraved onto one end, and following an injection of immortal spiritual power from Han Li, the head rapidly swelled in size to form an icy mountain that resembled a resting lion, and it seemed to possess formidable restrictive powers. After briefly observing the trio of acquired immortal treasures, Han Li stowed them away, then made a beckoning motion toward a case on the ground that was about a foot in size, and it slowly drifted over to him. On each side of the case was a sealed mechanism, upon which was plastered a silver talisman. Han Li inspected the talismans briefly to find that they were a azure dragon wood-trapping talisman, a white tiger radiant metal talisman, a vermilion bird fire-raising talisman, and a Xuanwu water-barring talisman. Furthermore, all four of the talismans were of the highest possible quality. Whatever's in this case had to have been held in extremely high regard by Feng Tiandu if he was willing to seal it with a four symbols talismanic formation, Han Li thought to himself. With that in mind, he made a hand seal and began unraveling the formation. The four symbols talismanic formation was quite troublesome to deal with as the powers of the four symbols supported one another, so the talismans couldn't be removed one after another. Instead, all of them had to be removed at once. Otherwise, there was a very good chance that whatever was inside the case would be destroyed on the spot. Hence, the best way to unravel such a formation was to have four people with similar cultivation bases working together to remove all four talismans at the same time. However, Han Li chose a much simpler and more direct approach, which was to encompass the case within the golden ripples released by his mantra-treasured axis, then remove all four talismans in rapid succession before they had a chance to react. After successfully removing the four talismans, the mechanisms on the case instantly sprang open, and Han Li lifted its lid before setting it aside. Even after the lid was removed, not even the slightest hint of spiritual power fluctuations emerged from within the case. Han Li peered into the case to find that there was a waxy yellow scripture and a palm-sized black jade badge inside, placed around which were a series of black nails that were arranged in an orderly fashion. The first thing that Han Li did was pull out the ancient scripture, and he discovered that it was quite smooth to the touch, indicating that it had been fashioned out of the hide of a certain type of beast. On the cover of the ancient scripture was inscribed the words, "Illusory Dawn Treasured Scripture." This title was rather familiar to Han Li, and after some contemplation, he realized where he had heard of it before. Back when he was searching for a time attribute cultivation art in the Transient Guild, someone had once mentioned to him there existed a time attribute cultivation art in the Dawn Fall sect, and it was precisely this illusory, dawn-treasured scripture. When it came to time attribute cultivation arts, Han Li had only ever come into contact with the mantra axis scripture, so he was unable to reference other cultivation arts of the same attribute to deepen his understanding of the laws of time. Hence, this illusory dawn-treasured scripture could provide him with a valuable learning experience. All of a sudden, a thought occurred to Han Li, and he hurriedly summoned his mantra-treasured axis, then directed the gaze of his eye of truth upon the ancient scripture. A beam of golden light shot out of the eye of truth before shining upon the yellow scripture, and a burst of golden light flashed momentarily over the surface of the scripture before immediately fading away again. A hint of disappointment appeared in Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, and he stowed away both the scripture and his mantra treasured axis. Looks like this scripture is different from that stone plaque in the Blaze Dragon Dao. Both contain records of time attribute cultivation arts, but this scripture doesn't appear to be imbued with any time law powers. With his immense spiritual sense, it didn't take Han Li very long at all to read through the entirety of the illusory dawn-treasured scripture, and he was very pleased to discover that even though this was also a time attribute cultivation art, it was completely different from his mantra axis scripture. In particular, it mentioned that once one attained an illusory dawn sand domain, they would be able to influence the power of time within a certain area. However, it seemed that neither Feng Tiandu nor Qi Tianxiao had been able to make much progress in this cultivation art. At the very least, neither of them were able to use this cultivation art in battle. Han Li wanted nothing more than to begin studying this cultivation art extensively right away, but doing so would require centuries, perhaps even millennia of seclusion, a luxury that he absolutely couldn't afford, given the current circumstances. With that in mind, he could only suppress these urges and stow the illusory dawn-treasured scripture away to be examined some other time. After that, Han Li picked up the black badge from the case. The badge was extremely smooth, and it appeared to have a transparent exterior, but its center was as dark as ink, resembling a drop of ink frozen in an ice crystal. Just like an ink droplet, the black center of the badge was still able to flow slightly. This appeared to be a badge that represented Feng Tiandu's status as the Grand Elder of the Dawnfall sect, and after the close call with Gong Shuji's badge, Han Li decided to set up a layer of restrictions, and only after that did he attempt to inject his immortal spiritual power into the badge. However, no matter what he tried, the black badge remained completely unmoved, and it was as if it were truly nothing more than an ordinary badge. In the end, Han Li wasn't able to uncover what purpose the badge could serve, and he could only give up on the endeavor. With that, all that remained in the case were the black nails, of which there were quite a few, 81 to be exact. Han Li picked out one of the nails at random and inspected it closely for a moment to find that it was riddled with all types of patterns, including some type of ancient beast and many peculiar runes, clearly indicating that this was no ordinary nail. On top of that, there were wisps of black mist that resembled viscous ink swirling around the nail, further lending it a sense of mystique. After picking up the black nail, Han Li noticed that there seemed to be a black metal slab embedded into the bottom of the case, and it was riddled with inscriptions of different depths. Only after fishing the metal slab out of the box did he discover that it was a formation plate that was riddled with spirit patterns, and on the lower left corner was a line of text that read, "Dawn Fall Heavenly Formation." Han Li was holding the formation plate in one hand and the black jade badge in the other, and he took a glance down at the 81 black nails as he murmured to himself, "This seems to be some type of protective formation." With that in mind, he stroked a finger over the formation plate to find that there was an indentation on its back that was identical in shape and size to the black badge in his hand. He immediately placed the badge into the indentation, and it fit inside perfectly with a faint crack. A burst of black light instantly surged over the formation plate, while the inky substance within the badge flew out from within before roaming over the surface of the badge. Specks of dark golden light emerged over certain parts of the badge in the wake of the flowing ink, and an elated look appeared in Han Li's eyes as he hurriedly refined both the formation plate and the badge together. After that, he set them down onto the ground, then picked up one of the black nails before gently placing its tip down onto one of the specks of dark golden light. As soon as the nail began to approach the formation plate, the latter abruptly released a burst of powerful suction force that caused the nail to slip out of Han Li's hand, before nailing itself into the speck of golden light. Immediately thereafter, a thunderous rumbling sound rang out in the forest not far away, and Han Li turned to that direction, to find that a black pillar of light that was several thousand feet tall had erupted out of the ground there. There appeared to be a powerful beast coiled around the pillar of light, and it was constantly releasing bursts of faint black qi. Han Li's eyes immediately lit up upon seeing this, and he continued to place more of the black nails down onto the formation plate. One nail after another was set down onto the formation plate, while more and more pillars of black light rose up over the island. After the final pillar of black light emerged, the black mist swirling around all of the pillars of light instantly spread outward to fuse together, quickly forming a black light barrier that encompassed the entire island. Immediately thereafter, all of the pillars of black light that had appeared on the island gradually became more and more transparent, until they vanished out of sight entirely. Before long, the light barrier encompassing the entire island also faded away, and it was as if nothing had ever happened. However, a miniature version of the island had already appeared on the formation plate in front of Han Li, indicating that it was under the protection of the formation. After observing the formation plate for a moment, he rose to his feet, then flew out of the island. As he passed through the light barrier, he clearly felt a burst of spiritual power fluctuations sweeping over his body, but as the one who had activated the formation, the light barrier naturally posed no obstacle to him. Looking into the island from the outside, it didn't appear to be any different, and it was impossible to tell that it was enshrouded within a formation. No spiritual power fluctuations could be detected, but as soon as Han Li activated his bright sight spirit eyes, the entire formation instantly became as clear as day to him. He flew all the way to around 10,000 feet away from the island, then clenched a hand into a tight fist and channeled his immortal spiritual power before throwing a punch at the island. A resounding boom rang out as the entire space shuddered violently, and a giant fist projection hat was over 1,000 feet in size emerged before hurtling directly toward the island. As soon as the fist projection came into contact with the light barrier, the latter was immediately revealed. Radiant black light emerged over its surface as a series of inky black dragons flew out of the 81 pillars of black light, drawing upon the power of the formation as they converged toward the spot on the light barrier that had been struck by the fist projection. An indentation that was several hundred feet deep was compressed into the black light barrier, and it looked as if it could collapse at any moment, but Han Li could sense that it was still far from reaching its limits. Han Li gave a slight nod of approval upon seeing this. Even though he hadn't unleashed that punch with his full power, it was still an extremely formidable blow, and the average true immortal stage protective formation would have most likely already been completely razed to the ground at this point. By Han Li's estimates, the defensive prowess of this formation was slightly inferior to that of the formation that the Northern Glacial Immortal Palace had set up in the Blaze Dragon Dao to trap Bailey Yan. Even so, this was already a very remarkable protective treasure. Generally speaking, the protective formation employed by a sect would always be set up in an area with an abundance of spiritual qi, and specially refined formation plates and formation flags also had to be set up to further bolster the formation. With those measures in place, the power of the formation would be maximized, but it would also be permanently set in place without any possibility of being moved. It would be very difficult for someone on the outside to break the formation, but the formation could easily fall prey to internal sabotage. In contrast, this formation was a portable one that could be activated using just a formation plate, so it was not only very convenient, but also quite difficult to damage. With this formation plate in his possession, setting up cave abodes was going to be far less of a hassle in the future. After returning to the island, Han Li placed the formation plate back into the treasured case, then stowed the case away into his storage bracelet before continuing to sort through Feng Tiandu's belongings. In contrast with Zhao Jinhen, Feng Tiandu had far fewer pills and pill recipes in his possession, and what he did have were also of inferior quality, but he possessed far more spirit materials than Zhao Jinhen did. Among them were as much as 1/4 of a kilogram of heavenly river stardust, around a dozen palm-sized vibrant rainbow crystals, and 7 or 8 vials of serene dark water, all 3 of which were important spirit materials for refining acquired immortal treasures, so they were always hotly contested during any major auctions that they appeared, even for the tiniest amount. Aside from that, Feng Tiandu also had a pair of silver meridian immortal vines that were each around a foot in length and roughly the same thickness as an infant's arm. These vines were vastly renowned in the northern glacial immortal region as an exceptional puppet refinement material, and they were impossible to buy from virtually anywhere. According to some unofficial historical records that Han Li had read on some scriptures, puppets refined using these vines possess bodies comparable to true immortals in power, and they also develop a system of meridians in their bodies that allow them to channel immortal spiritual power and unleash immortal abilities. After stowing all of these materials away, Han Li's gaze fell upon a bamboo cane that was as green as jade. The cane was only around 3 feet in length and as thick as an adult human thumb. It was split up into 9 sections, and each section was giving off a faint white glow. Even though it was without a root, it still seemed to be teeming with vitality, indicating that it was imbued with wood law powers. Han Li was cultivating the laws of time, while his earthly deity avatar was cultivating the laws of water, so he didn't know much about other types of law powers. He was still aware of just how precious these materials that were imbued with law powers were. In particular, for those cultivating the laws of wood, this bamboo staff would be an extremely highly sought-after treasure. Han Li was going to require a large quantity of items that contained time law powers in order to manifest more time law threads in the future, so he could see if he could exchange these items for things that he needed. Aside from that bamboo cane, none of the rest of Feng Tiandu's belongings caught Han Li's interest, not because there was nothing else of value, but simply because Han Li's standards had become almost absurdly high. Otherwise, the mountain of immortal origin stones in Feng Tiandu's possession, which was even larger than Zhao Jinhen's collection, would be enough to leave the average golden immortal completely flabbergasted. After sorting through all of Feng Tiandu's belongings, Han Li paused momentarily, then refined Gong Shuji's storage bracelet before also releasing all of its contents. In the blink of an eye, a mountain of immortal origin stones that exceeded even the combined wealth of Feng Tiandu and Zhao Jinhen appeared in the clearing. The immortal origin stones on the top of the mountain slowly clattered down until they reached the edge of the clearing, while all of the other treasures were squished to the side. Han Li's mouth gaped open slightly at the sight of the small mountain of immortal origin stones, which was quite a bit taller than himself, and he was stunned beyond words. I can't believe a high zenith cultivator has so many immortal origin stones. In addition to the immortal origin stones that he had taken from Galing, Zhao Jinhen, Feng Tiandu, and the others, his current wealth exceeded 2 million immortal origin stones, which was surely comparable to the entire wealth of a major sect. In the blink of an eye, Han Li had become ridiculously wealthy, and it seemed that he had more money than he knew what to do with. However, he then quickly regained his composure. The path of cultivation was a long, arduous one, and the amount of resources that he would have to go through was immeasurable. It was going to take a vast amount of resources just to secure more items that contained time law powers, and that wasn't even to mention all of the pill refinement resources that he required. With that in mind, these 2 million immortal origin stones were most likely nowhere near enough to even support his cultivation to the high zenith stage, and the elation in his heart immediately began to die down. He made his way to the other end of the clearing, and from there, he continued to examine Gong Shuji's belongings. The first thing that caught his attention was a massive wooden shelf with multiple tiers, one that was laden with over 1,000 transient guild masks of all types of different descriptions. A stunned look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. Aside from the numbers on these masks, they also had a variety of different prefixes, including worm, raccoon, dragon, crow, and fox. Looking at this vast collection of masks, Han Li couldn't help but feel a sense of sorrow for these transient guild members that he had never met before. If he had perished by Gong Shuji's hands, then his masks would have been added to this collection as well. It looks like I'll never have to worry about running out of masks to use. Han Li chuckled as he swept a sleeve through the air to stow the entire wooden shelf away. Due to how enormous Gong Shuji's collection was, Han Li had to sort through one type of items at a time, and the first category of items that he had chosen to examine were the pills. Gong Shuji had a large number of pills in his collection, all of which were of an extremely high caliber, and most of them were unidentifiable to Han Li, but he presumed that they had to all be high zenith stage pills. Having said that, Han Li was a heavenly pill master, so he was able to determine from the aromas and other characteristics of these pills that most of them were for recovery and regenerative purposes, while there were only 2 types for cultivation enhancement. It just so happened to be the case that there was golden slip plastered to each of the jade vials that contained these 2 types of pills, and the slips carried the names of these pills, namely clear jade pills and zenith garden pills. However, what was rather disappointing to him was that there was only one of each pill left in the 2 jade vials. As for the golden slips, their material was rather special, so he decided to give them a closer examination as well. As soon as his hand came into contact with one of the golden slips, a series of golden characters emerged from within, denoting a series of medicinal ingredient names, such as Jade Yang Essence, Wind Spirit Seeds, 9-leaf silverberries. Clearly, the golden slips contain the pill refinement recipes for these 2 pills. Han Li examined the lists of ingredients while sorting through the spirit medicines in Gong Shuji's collection, and he discovered that Gong Shuji still had a spare supply of most of these ingredients, while only a few ones were missing. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. After that, he picked up a black jade box, then tore off the golden talisman adhered to it before opening it. As the lid of the box was removed, he was immediately greeted by a rich medicinal aroma. There was a pill that was as fair as jade sitting in the jade box, and there were 3 golden lines on its surface, while faint wisps of mist were rising up from it to form a tiny white cloud around 3 inches above it. Much to Han Li's astonishment and elation, this was a 3rd-tier Dao pill imbued with Qi Law powers. A Dao pill of such a high caliber was most definitely a priceless treasure, and Han Li couldn't help but examine it repeatedly with elation in his eyes, unable to bear the thought of putting it down. Only after a long while did he close the jade box again before stowing it away. After sorting through all of the pills, Han Li took a moment to compose himself before working through Gong Shuji's treasures. To Han Li's surprise, there were only 2 acquired immortal treasures in Gong Shuji's collection, and after some thought, he realized that perhaps high zenith cultivators simply relied less on treasures than golden immortals. One of the acquired immortal treasures was a tiny, rusty bianzhong that was very shabby in appearance, looking as if it had just been unearthed long ago. However, when Han Li tried to crush it with his immense strength, he discovered that he was unable to do so. Aside from that, he discovered that no matter what he struck the Bianzhong with, it didn't produce any sound. Even after some extensive experimentation, he was unable to find out how to use the treasure. As for the other immortal treasure, that was a strange-looking black-bladed weapon that was around 5 feet in length, with the hilt and blade roughly equal in length, and its surface was riddled with lightning cloud designs. Upon injecting his immortal spiritual power into the blade, Han Li discovered that it would tremble and buzz, and all of the lightning cloud designs on its surface would turn golden in color, while arcs of golden lightning sprang forth. However, as he attempted to inject the power of the lightning bird and the divine devilbane lightning in his body into the blade, it immediately began to tremble violently, clearly displaying intense rejection. After some contemplation, Han Li summoned Taoist Zai, who only took a brief glance at all of the spoils that littered the entire clearing before withdrawing its gaze. I managed to reap some spoils during the earlier battle, and this blade is one of them. You're adept in using the power of lightning, so why don't you take a look to see if this is something that you can use? Han Li proposed. Taoist Zai remained silent as it swept its gaze over the blade, upon which its expression changed ever so slightly. Han Li immediately noticed this minute change in Taoist Zai's expression, and he asked, "Is there something wrong?" "If I'm not mistaken, the name of this blade is Thunderslash, and it's a vastly renowned weapon from the Black Soil Immortal region," Taoist Zai replied. "The Black Soil Immortal region. It sounds like you've recovered quite a bit more of your memories, Brother Zai," Han Li remarked. "Ever since we arrived in the northern glacial immortal region, snippets of memories have been returning to me, and it's becoming more and more frequent an occurrence of late. Some memories that were previously incomprehensible to me have also been contextualized, so I have indeed recalled many things," Taoist Zai explained. "It's fine, you don't have to explain anything to me. Seeing as you're able to identify the blade, I'm sure you'll be able to make good use of it, so you can have it," Han Li said with a smile. "I can't just accept such a precious gift for nothing," Taoist Zai said in an indifferent voice. Han Li was familiar with Taoist Zai's personality, so he wasn't surprised by this response at all, and he said, "From the spirit realm to the immortal realm, you've assisted me greatly on many occasions. Even though you're contractually bound to do so, I still know better than to take you for granted. On top of that, I'll most likely be requiring your assistance from here onward as well. With this blade in your possession, your combat prowess will be significantly enhanced, and that'll only further benefit me." After a brief moment of contemplation, Taoist Zai nodded in response. "I suppose you're right." It then accepted the blade from Han Li and grabbed onto its hilt with both hands as a flash of golden lightning lit up in its eyes. A loud crackling sound rang out as all of the lightning cloud designs on the entire blade began to radiate dazzling golden light, and the spiritual power fluctuations emanating from it were countless times more powerful than what Han Li had been able to manage. After testing out the blade for a while longer, Taoist Zai stowed it away as it promised. "I'll be sure to repay you for this." Han Li merely nodded in response with a smile on his face. A curious look then appeared in his eyes as he wondered to himself, could it be that Taoist Zai's former master came from this black soil, immortal region? This was clearly a question that Han Li didn't have an answer to, so he didn't ponder it for long before he continued to sort through his spoils. This time, his gaze fell upon a tiny white jade Pixu. It seemed to be no different from an ornamental antique, and it was giving off a warm gleam under the light of the sun. Han Li examined the Pixu momentarily with his bright-sight spirit eyes, then smiled as he asked, "Are you going to reveal yourself, or do you want me to beat you until you have to?" The Pixu remained laying on the ground in a completely still manner, as if it really were just an inanimate object. If you're going to force my hand, then don't blame me for what I'm about to do, Han Li said in a cold voice as his eyes narrowed slightly. In the wake of Han Li's threat, the white Pixu finally began to move, and it swelled rapidly to transform into a giant white beast the size of a house. To think that a mere golden immortal would dare to. The giant white Pixu's voice abruptly cut off as its entire body stiffened. As it turned out, 3 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords had appeared around its neck, and all of them had their tips aimed directly at its throat. The Pixu had no doubt that if it were to step out of line, then those 3 swords would have it decapitated in an instant. With that in mind, the Pixu immediately shrunk down to the size of an average pet doff, and it laid down in front of Han Li in a submissive manner as it said in a feeble voice, "Don't be like that. Let's just have a nice and civilized chat." The 3 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords continued to hover in the air around it, displaying no intention of letting it off the hook. "You must be Gong Shuji's spirit pet, right? I can sense that you have quite a powerful aura. Why didn't you help him during his battle against us?" Han Li asked. "Tui, I'm a primordial true spirit, not a spirit pet. What right does he have to make me his spirit pet? I was only forced to follow him because he'd lived longer than me and possessed a superior cultivation base." The Pixu roared in a furious voice. "Answer me, why didn't you help him?" Han Li asked as a cold look appeared on his face. "Because even if I had helped him, there's no way we would have been able to win," the Pixu replied in a sheepish manner. "One of you had mastered the laws of time, while the other had mastery over the laws of reincarnation, and that's not even to mention that old monster. Gong Shuji was an idiot for picking a fight with you. I certainly wasn't going to go down with him." "Did he not have any way to force you to help him?" Han Li asked with a skeptical expression. "He wishes he did. Unless he killed me on the spot, there was nothing he could do as long as I refused to sign a contract with him," the Pixius replied with a smug expression. "So you're telling me he was unable to do anything to you? Is your current body not one that's been restricted by him using a secret technique? Otherwise, how could a true spirit like yourself have been turned into a little ornament that could be stowed away in a storage tool?" Han Li asked as he raised an eyebrow. That's because." The Pixu had no response for this. "Tell me the truth. What abilities do you possess that convinced him not to place any more forceful restrictions upon you?" Han Li asked in a demanding voice. "Fine, I'll come clean to you. I have an innate ability that allows me to gather wealth. Over the years, that old bastard, Gong Shuji, managed to accumulate a great deal of wealth with me by his side, and that's why he didn't want to kill me," the Pixu conceded. "If you keep lying and insisting on testing my patience, then I'll kill you right now. Your true spirit blood will be quite useful to me," Han Li mused as a hint of killing intent surfaced in his eyes. "No, don't do that," the Pixu hurriedly implored in an urgent voice. "All of you humans are so sly and cunning. My innate ability isn't to gather wealth. Instead, it's to uncover certain hidden natural treasures, and as I become more powerful, this innate ability will also continue to improve." "All right, I suppose only time can tell whether you're being truthful to me. Now then, do you want to sign a contract with me or be slaughtered for your true spirit bloodline?" Han Li asked. "What choice do I have? Having said that, I like the look of you a lot better than Gong Shuji." The Pixu sighed in a pitiable voice as it took a glance at the 3 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords and the time spirit domain around it. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face upon hearing this, and he raised a hand before extending a finger toward the Pixu's glabella. After the contract was signed, the Pixu said, "We're on the same boat now, Master, and my first piece of advice to you is to destroy that thing." Han Li turned to the direction that it was pointing in to discover a shimmering golden disc, and he asked, "What's that?" "It's the thing that Gong Shuji used to communicate with other immortal envoys and emissaries. As soon as the heavenly court learns that Gong Shuji has met his demise, they'll be sure to send people to track down that thing, the Pixu explained. Han Li reached out to make a grabbing motion, drawing the disc into his grasp for a closer examination. A cold look then appeared on his face as he said, "If this thing is destroyed by force, the heavenly court will immediately be tipped off. Are you trying to get us both killed?" Of course that would be the outcome if you destroy it using conventional means, but if you give it to me, then I assure you that won't happen. Now that a contract has been established between us, our lives are interconnected, so what would I stand to gain from screwing you over? The Pixu grumbled. Han Li raised an eyebrow with a skeptical look on his face, but he still handed the disc over to the Pixu, upon which the latter immediately swallowed the disc whole. "I was born with no anus, and there's an independent world in my belly, so nothing that goes in will be able to come out unless I allow it. Now that the communication disc is in my belly, it's completely cut off from this world, so no one will be able to track it down," the Pixu explained with a proud expression. "It sounds like you're the perfect thing to use to get rid of evidence after killing someone. This is your true innate ability, isn't it?" Han Li jibed. The Pixu immediately realized that it had revealed too much, and it protested in a disgruntled voice, "Don't even think about making me swallow anything dirty. I don't eat anything aside from treasures and spirit materials." An amused smile appeared on Han Li's face as he continued to sort through Gong Shuji's belongings. The Pixu seemed to know Gong Shuji's treasures like the back of its paw, and it proved to be a great help to Han Li as he sorted through the treasures. After the treasures came the spirit materials and spirit medicines, of which there was a huge stash, and all of them were incredibly rare and precious pieces. There was also an incomplete map of the Immortal Realm, which denoted many of the areas in the northern glacial immortal region. To Han Li's surprise and elation, he also discovered a pair of items that contained time law powers, one of which was a round fruit that was riddled with tiny golden spots, while the other was a broken dagger that was around a foot in length. Before long, the sun set, and dusk was already beginning to transition into night. It had taken Han Li the good part of an entire day to sort through all of his spoils, and he stretched lazily as he exhaled with a pleased smile on his face. He then swept a sleeve through the air to release a streak of golden light, and a little girl that appeared to be 8 or 9 years of age emerged. She stumbled around a little before falling flat onto her backside, and Han Li hurriedly cast a concerned gaze toward her, only to find that was completely fine, but she was yawning non-stop with heavy-lidded eyes, looking as if she had just been woken up from a deep sleep. "Why did you wake me up, uncle?" Jin Tong complained in a displeased voice, displaying no intention of opening her eyes. "Wake up, Jin Tong, it's time to eat," Han Li said with a smile. Jin Tong finally forced her eyes open slightly upon hearing this, and she asked, "What is there to eat?" "Take a look for yourself," Han Li replied as he swept a sleeve through the air, and close to 20 treasures that were giving off formidable spiritual power fluctuations instantly appeared in the clearing, including the white stone pillars that Jin Tong hadn't yet had a chance to finish. "Whoa, there's so much," Jin Tong exclaimed as she snapped wide awake in an instant. She then flew through the forest as a blurry golden shadow, arriving in front of the collection of treasures in the blink of an eye. She then wrapped her arms around one of the white stone pillars with an ecstatic look on her face, but right at this moment, a thought suddenly occurred to her, and she turned to Han Li with her eyes narrowed slightly in suspicion and accusation. Han Li immediately felt a chill run down his spine at the sight of her piercing gaze, and he asked, "What's wrong? You were counting treasures without me, weren't you, uncle? These are just the things that you don't need, aren't they?" Jin Tong complained with her brows tightly furrowed in displeasure. "You were sleeping really soundly after eating that cauldron, so I thought I'd let you sleep," Han Li replied in a sheepish manner. Jin Tong immediately pouted with displeasure upon hearing this, clearly not very satisfied with Han Li's answer. The jade Pixu was looking back and forth at Han Li, and Jin Tong upon seeing this, seemingly a little confused. "This bracelet is for you. You can have everything inside it," Han Li said as he raised a hand to summon another storage bracelet, which he handed to Jin Tong. The former owner of this storage bracelet was none other than Qi Tianxiao. Jin Tong was still looking rather displeased as she accepted the storage bracelet, but as soon as she inspected its contents, a wide smile immediately appeared on her face. "You're the best, uncle." Jin Tong quickly put on the storage bracelet, then stowed all of the other treasures on the ground away as well, while Han Li looked on with a faint smile. The jade Pixu was feeling very indignant at the sight of this differential treatment, and it could only lay its head down onto the ground with a dejected expression. Only then did Jin Tong notice the white Pixu that was laying on the ground nearby, and she skipped over to its side before laying a hand down onto the top of its head. "Where did you get this dog from, uncle? Can I eat it?" The jade Pixu immediately sprang up onto its haunches upon hearing this, and it yelled, "What the hell are you saying, you little brat? I'll have you know that I'm a primordial true spirit." "Did you just call me a little brat?" A cold look appeared in Jin Tong's eyes as she bared her teeth in a menacing fashion. The jade Pixu immediately felt a chill run down its spine, but there was no way that it would allow its honor to be trampled upon by a little girl, so it immediately swelled to the size of a house once again as it roared, "You asked for it." Jin Tong merely grinned as a burst of golden light appeared over her body. An exasperated look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he turned and departed from the clearing. Ali. A few minutes later, peace and quiet returned to the island. "Let's go. We need to make a trip back to Dark Vale Island," Han Li said after erasing all traces of his visit from the island. He then swept a sleeve through the air to summon the green jade flying carriage that once belonged to Gong Shuji before flying onto it. "All right, let's go," Jin Tong yelled with an elated look on her face, and she was straddled atop the jade Pixu, which looked as if it wanted to die. "Hurry up, Zio Bai," Jin Tong urged as she gave it a slap on the head. The jade Pixu gave a distraught wail before carrying Jin Tong onto the flying carriage, which then sped away into the distance, vanishing out of sight in the blink of an eye. Ali. Several days later, a ball of green light appeared in the sky above an island as if by instantaneous teleportation, and it left a long trail of afterimages behind it. The ball of green light faded to reveal a green jade flying carriage, atop which stood Han Li, who was looking down at the carriage with a pleased look on his face. As expected of a flying immortal treasure used by a high zenith cultivator, the flying carriage was several times faster than the azure flying boat that he had previously used. However, due to how incredibly fast the flying carriage was, he was still yet to fully control it, so it was a little jarring whenever it drew to a halt. At this moment, Jin Tong was laying on her back on the flying carriage, sleeping soundly with her little belly exposed, while the Pixu was laying in a corner of the carriage in a dejected fashion. Jin Tong had eaten a bunch of spirit treasures these past few days, and as a result, she had become quite drowsy. Her aura was also fluctuating unsteady while slowly growing more powerful, indicating that a breakthrough was imminent. A hint of elation flashed through Han Li's eyes as he detected Jin Tong's aura fluctuations. Jin Tong was already extremely powerful at this point, and even Han Li wasn't confident in his ability to defeat her in a one-on-one battle without using his time law powers. If she were to make another breakthrough, then she would naturally be an even more formidable ally. A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face, following which he swept a hand through the air to release a burst of azure light that swept up Jin Tong before carrying her into a spirit beast pouch. She didn't like staying in spirit beast pouches, but given that a breakthrough was imminent, it was safer for her to be in one. The Pixu immediately stood up upon seeing this, and before it had a chance to say anything, Han Li stowed it away into another spirit beast pouch, alongside some spirit treasures that were of no use to him. You can take a rest in this spirit beast pouch. Here are some spirit treasures that you can eat for your recovery. After that, he cast his gaze toward the sea down below. This region of the sea was previously a battleground between Black Wind Island and Azure Feather Island, but peace and quiet had since returned to the area. In fact, over the past few days, Han Li hadn't spotted even a single Black Wind Island or Azure Feather Island cultivator on the islands that he had passed by. After some brief thought, Han Li quickly realized why the conflict had suddenly subsided. It had to have been the case that the conflict between the two islands was only serving as a smokescreen set up by the northern glacial Immortal Palace to throw off all of the other powers, so that they wouldn't be able to find the entrance of the Immortal Manor. Now that the Infernal Frost Immortal Manor had already come and gone, there was naturally no need for the conflict to continue. This was good news for all of the islands in the Black Wind Sea, including Dark Vale, Island Dark Vale Island. Han Li remained on the spot for a moment longer, then made a hand seal, upon which the green flying carriage flew into the distance, vanishing out of sight in the blink of an eye. Several more days passed by, and Dark Vale Island finally came into view on the distant horizon. Right at this moment, Han Li suddenly stopped in his tracks, then cast his gaze to the left with a peculiar look on his face. He then immediately flew in that direction, arriving on an island not long thereafter. The island wasn't very large, far smaller than Dark Vale Island, and it was very long and thin, resembling a willow leaf. Vegetation on the island was quite sparse, and there were large patches of gray rock exposed everywhere. An intrigued look appeared in Han Li's eyes as he inspected the island down below. This was none other than the island inhabited by the cold crystal race, and in the wake of Han Qiu's demise, the island was claimed by Dark Vale Island. At this moment, the entire island was enshrouded under a blue light barrier. Han Li took a glance at his surroundings, and he recalled that the scene that he had witnessed back in the Moonlight Palace after being sucked into the wall of light by the heaven-controlling vial was precisely this exact setting. However, even though this was the same island as the one he saw back then, there were still some differences between the two. Could it be? His eyes suddenly lit up slightly as he flew down into the sea near the island, then continued to descend through the water, quickly reaching the seabed. At the same time, he released his spiritual sense outward, and he quickly tracked down a giant rock on the seabed before unleashing a streak of sword chi to strike it. A huge hole was blasted into the rock, and Han Li reached into the hole to retrieve a green bracelet that was covered in mud. "This is it," he exclaimed with an elated smile on his face at the sight of the green bracelet. This was the storage bracelet belonging to the golden, immortal stage nascent soul that Han Li had possessed during that vision. This was proof that the vision had been real, and he really had possessed a nascent soul from the ancient past, back when the Infernal Frost Immortal Palace was destroyed. With that in mind, he flipped a hand over to produce the heaven-controlling vial and began inspecting it in silence. Its ability to drastically accelerate the aging of spirit plants was already quite astonishing. Yet in addition to that, it had also developed the ability to send Han Li's soul into the past. It seemed that the first vision that he had experienced, back when he had possessed Ling Yunzi, had also been a past event. However, it was impossible to tell exactly what time period that was. There was also the scene depicting the portly monk and his 5 disciples, and even to this day, that scene remained fresh in Han Li's mind. Having said that, he still had no idea who the portly monk was. However, one thing was certain. The monk's cultivation base had to have been far superior to his own. Otherwise, there was no way that he would have been able to make such significant strides in his cultivation just from hearing the monk's preaching. After pondering the matter for a moment longer, Han Li stowed the heavenly controlling vial away. It was impossible for him to tell just how many secrets the heaven-controlling vial was harboring, but it was clear that it was even more profound than he had once imagined. With a sweep of his sleeve, Han Li released a burst of blue light that expelled all of the surrounding seawater, creating an empty bubble on the seabed. He then released the contents of the storage bracelet, revealing some immortal origin stones, spirit treasures, and pills, among other things. He had briefly examined these things during the vision, but due to the time constraints, he wasn't able to inspect them very thoroughly, and now that he had a chance to do so, he was very pleased by what he saw. There were around 50,000 to 60,000 immortal origin stones on the ground, which was a trifling amount compared with his current wealth, but it was still quite a significant sum. As for the spirit treasures, all of them were flying swords of high calibers, and there were as many as 60 to 70 of them. With the exceptions of a few swords, all of them were a light blue color, and they were also identical in shape and design, clearly indicating that this was a set of flying swords. After counting the swords thoroughly, Han Li discovered that there were 72 of them, just like his azure bamboo cloud swarm swords, and they were giving off bursts of faint starpore fluctuations. Han Li only briefly examined these flying swords before looking away. All of them were peak spirit treasures that were only one step away from becoming immortal treasures, but they were still far inferior to his azure bamboo cloud swarm swords, and therefore not worthy of his attention.